Hey friends, welcome to the Horror Sleep. Almost 90% of you watching aren't subscribed. If you enjoy these true park ranger horror stories, hit that subscribe button and leave a like. It really helps the channel. Oh, and where are you watching from tonight? Let me know in the comments. My name is Ava Hellman, and I worked as a forest ranger in Idaho's Sawtooth Wilderness for 11 years. If you've never been to the Sawtooths, imagine granite peaks so sharp they could pierce the clouds, mountain lakes so cold they could stop your heart, and miles of lodgepole pine forests where you could hike for days without seeing another person. It's a beauty that makes you feel small, but it's also the kind of place where you're on your own if trouble arises. Last month, while visiting my sister in Boise, I stumbled upon your channel. My sister had turned it on while preparing dinner, and when I heard someone mention finding something a park ranger couldn't explain, my chest tightened. Because I have a story like that too, a story I haven't even shared with other rangers. But I think it's time to share it now. This happened in late September of 2016, right at the end of the busy season. The aspen were turning gold, the nights were getting cold, and most of the tourists had gone home. That's when we do our deep patrols, checking the backcountry sites to make sure no one's gotten themselves into trouble before the first real snow hits. I was assigned to check the Ice Lake Trail, which is a 9-mile round trip that climbs about 3,000 feet. It's not the hardest hike we've got, but it's no walk in the park either. The trail switchbacks up through pine forest, then breaks out above tree line where it's all granite and stunted white bark pines. The lake itself sits in a bowl at about 9,200 feet, surrounded by cliffs that go up another 1,000 feet on 3 sides. I started hiking around 7 in the morning. The air was cold enough to see my breath, and there was frost on the grass at the trailhead. I love that time of year in the mountains. Everything's quiet, crisp, like the world's holding its breath. The first few miles were routine. I passed a couple of hikers coming down, checked their permits, reminded them about the bear activity we'd been seeing. By the time I got above tree line, it was close to 10, and the sun had burned off the frost. That's when I saw the tent. It was set up maybe 40 yards off the trail, tucked behind some rocks and stunted pines. Not unusual by itself, plenty of people camp up there, but something about it caught my eye. The tent was one of those cheap dome types, the kind you'd buy at a department store for $30, and the door was hanging half open, flapping in the wind. I called out as I got closer. "Hello? Ranger coming in?" No answer. I called again. Nothing. When I reached the tent, I could see it was empty. Sleeping bags still laid out, a small backpack in the corner. I stuck my head inside. The tent had that new smell, like it hadn't been used much. The sleeping bag was one of those rectangular ones rated for maybe 40 degrees, which isn't nearly enough for September nights at this elevation where it drops into the 20s. The backpack was too small for overnight gear. Inside, I found a water bottle half full, a granola bar, a cheap flashlight with dead batteries, and a wallet. I shouldn't have opened the wallet, but I did. Driver's license for a guy named Marcus Delgado, 42 years old, from Boise. There was $63 cash and a photo of 2 kids, maybe 8 and 10, both smiling at the camera. I set the wallet back down and backed out of the tent. Something felt wrong. People don't leave their wallets at camp, especially not with cash in them, and the whole setup was off. No food, no stove, no warm clothes. It looked less like someone planning to camp and more like someone who'd just bought a tent, hauled it up here, and walked away. I radioed my supervisor, a guy named Stanley Krause. "Stanley, you copy?" "Go ahead, Ava." I'm at about mile 4.5 on Ice Lake Trail. Got an abandoned tent, no occupant. Wallet inside belongs to Marcus Delgado from Boise. No sign of the individual. Copy. Any indication of distress? I looked around the campsite. No signs of a struggle. No blood. No torn gear. Just a cheap tent with the door hanging open. Negative, but the gear's wrong. It's inadequate for overnight at this elevation. Could be a day hiker who decided to crash for the night. Maybe, but he left his wallet and his water. Good point. Can you search the immediate area? Already on it. I spent the next hour working in circles around the tent, calling out Marcus Delgado's name, looking for tracks, for any sign of where he might have gone. The granite up here doesn't hold prints well, and with the wind we'd been getting, even dirt tracks don't last long. I found nothing. No footprints leading away. No disturbed vegetation. Nothing. I was about to head back when I noticed something tucked into a crack in a boulder about 20 yards from the tent. I walked over and pulled it out. It was a piece of paper, folded once. The edges were damp, but the center was dry. I unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was shaky, like someone had written it in a hurry or with cold hands. 3:12 a.m. he went out, didn't come back. That was it. 7 words, no name, no date. I looked at my watch. It was 11:43 a.m. If this note was from last night, someone had been out here in the dark, alone. And Marcus Delgado had left the tent at 3:12 in the morning and never come back. But here's what bothered me. The paper was damp on the edges. Fresh damp, like someone had just touched it with wet hands. We hadn't had rain in 4 days, and the morning dew had burned off hours ago. There was no reason for that paper to be wet. I radioed Stanley again. I found a note. I think we've got a missing person. What's it say? I read it to him. There was a long pause. And the paper's wet? He asked. Yeah, fresh. I don't know where the moisture came from. Could be condensation if someone was holding it recently. Maybe. But it didn't feel right. All right, I'm coming up with Jonas Brigham. Should be there in about 90 minutes. Expand your search, but don't go more than a quarter mile from the tent. Jonas Brigham was younger than me, maybe 30, relatively new to the ranger service, but he'd been a search and rescue volunteer before that. Good guy to have in a situation like this. I put the note in an evidence bag and started a systematic search, moving in a grid pattern, calling out every few minutes. The terrain up here is brutal. Lots of cliffs, lots of places where you could fall and no one would see you from the trail. But I found nothing. No tracks, no blood, no pieces of torn clothing. Nothing. By the time Stanley and Jonas arrived, I'd searched every accessible area within a quarter mile of the tent. We stood at the campsite while I walked them through everything I'd found. Jonas read the note and frowned. 3:12 a.m., that's specific. Yeah, I said. Not middle of the night or early morning. Exactly 3:12. Stanley looked around the campsite. Like someone was watching the time. Or scared and checking it constantly, Jonas added. There's something else, I said. I pulled out the evidence bag with the note. Feel it. Jonas touched the plastic over the damp edges. That's fresh. There's been no rain, no dew at this time of day, and I found it in a rock crack that was completely dry. The three of us stood there, not saying what we were all thinking. Stanley finally broke the silence. All right, we treat this as a standard missing person search. Jonas, take north. Ava, you've covered west, so take east. I'll go south toward the lake. We meet back here in 90 minutes. Radio check every 30. We split up. I headed east, moving carefully, scanning everything. The granite here is old and weathered, full of cracks and drop-offs. Easy to get hurt, easier to get lost. I kept thinking I'd find Marcus Delgado wedged in some crevice, maybe injured but alive. But I found nothing. At the 60-minute mark, I radioed in. East sector clear. Jonas came back. North clear. Then Stanley. I'm at the lake, nothing here, but there's something you need to see. Come to my position. It took me 20 minutes to reach Ice Lake. The trail climbs steep for the last half-mile, switchbacking up granite before dropping you at the water's edge. It's a beautiful spot, the water that impossible alpine blue-green, surrounded by cliffs. Stanley was standing at the shore when I got there. Jonas was already there, both of them staring at the ground. "What is it?" I asked. Stanley pointed. "Tracks." I looked down. In a small patch of wet silt near the water there were boot prints. Fresh ones, edges still sharp. They led from the trail to the water, and then they stopped. "Could be from anyone," Jonas said, but he didn't sound convinced. "Look at the size," Stanley said. I crouched down. Men's boot, probably size 10 or 11. Deep prints like someone moving fast or carrying weight. "Could be Delgado," I said. "That's what I'm thinking, but look where they go." I followed the tracks with my eyes. They walked straight to the water's edge and just ended. No prints leading back. No signs the person had turned or walked sideways. Just straight to the water and stop. "Could have walked into the water," Jonas suggested. "In September? That water's maybe 35 degrees. Unless he wasn't thinking straight. Hypothermia, altitude sickness." Stanley nodded. Possible. If he was out all night with inadequate gear, his judgment could have been compromised. But I was staring at those tracks and something was bothering me. Then it hit me. "They're pointing the wrong way," I said. "What do you mean?" Stanley asked. "Look, these prints point toward the water, someone walking forward. But there's no return path. If he walked to the water and back, we'd see prints both directions." "Maybe the return prints got erased," Jonas offered. "By what? There's been no wind strong enough, no rain." We stood there looking at impossible tracks. Finally, Stanley took out his camera and photographed them from every angle. "We need to call this in," he said. "This is officially search and rescue. Jonas, hike down and coordinate with the dispatch. Get more personnel and a helicopter if weather allows. Ava and I will sweep the shoreline." Jonas headed down at a jog. Stanley and I spent the next 2 hours working around the lake, checking every inch of shore, every crack in the rocks. We found nothing. No body in the water. No more tracks. Nothing. When we got back to the tent, it was late afternoon and getting cold. Jonas had returned with the word that a helicopter was scheduled for first light and 4 more rangers were on their way. "We should bag the tent and personal effects," Stanley said. "Bring them down as evidence." I started photographing everything before we touched it. As I was rolling up the sleeping bag, something fell out and hit the ground. Another piece of paper, folded the same way. My hands shook as I picked it up and unfolded it. Same handwriting, same shaky quality, but different words. I heard him come back at 4:03 a.m., but it wasn't him anymore. I stared at those words. Stanley read over my shoulder and went pale. "That wasn't there when you first checked the tent?" he asked. "No, I went through everything. I would have seen it." "Could it have been stuck in the lining?" "Maybe, but I don't think so." Jonas read it. "What does that mean? It wasn't him anymore." None of us had an answer. We decided to hike out before dark and return with the full team in the morning. Nobody talked much on the way down. I kept thinking about those notes, the specific times, the strange wording. It wasn't him anymore. What did that mean? Was Marcus Delgado acting strange when he came back? Disoriented, delirious from exposure. We reached the trailhead just after dark. Stanley coordinated with dispatch while Jonas and I loaded everything into the truck. The tent, the sleeping bag, the backpack, the wallet, the 2 notes sealed in evidence bags. "I'm making some calls," Stanley said as we drove back. "See if I can track down family for Marcus Delgado. Get some context on why he was up there. You thinking suicide? Jonas asked. Not ruling anything out. But suicide didn't explain the tracks, didn't explain the notes, didn't explain any of it. Back at the station, Stanley got on the phone while Jonas and I wrote reports. I've written hundreds of incident reports, but this one was hard. How do you document something that doesn't make sense? Stanley came out of his office about an hour later, looking troubled. Got hold of Marcus Delgado's ex-wife. They divorced 2 years ago. She says he's been struggling with depression. Lost his job 6 months back. She's got the kids. So maybe suicide, Jonas said. Maybe. Stanley sat down. But she said something else. Marcus was terrified of water, nearly drowned as a kid. She said there's no way he'd go near that lake voluntarily. The room went quiet. Depression can make you do things you're afraid of, I said. Confront your fears one last time. Could be. Stanley didn't sound convinced. Either way, we continue tomorrow. Helicopter at first light, ground teams sweep the area. I went home, but didn't sleep well. Kept seeing those tracks ending at the water. Kept reading those notes in my mind. It wasn't him anymore. The next morning, I was at the trailhead by 5:30. The full team assembled by 6, 8 rangers, 2 search and rescue volunteers with dogs. The helicopter was already up, running thermal imaging. We split into pairs and spread across the search grid. Jonas and I got the area north of the lake, a section of granite slabs and boulder fields. The dogs found nothing. The helicopter found nothing. By noon, we'd covered every accessible area within 2 miles and found 0 evidence of where Marcus Delgado had gone. That afternoon, Stanley expanded the search and brought in more resources. We set up a base camp, and for 3 days we combed every inch of that wilderness. Divers even went into Ice Lake, though the visibility was terrible, and the cold limited their bottom time. Nothing. Marcus Delgado had vanished. On the 4th day, I was paired with a search and rescue volunteer named Sarah Torres, 20 years experience. We were assigned a remote canyon about 3 miles east of Ice Lake. Rough terrain, not many visitors. We'd been hiking about 2 hours when Sarah stopped. "You smell that?" I paused and sniffed. There was a faint smell, sweet and rotten. Decomposition. "Yeah, let's follow it." We moved slowly, tracking the smell through a boulder field. It got stronger as we went. "There," Sarah said, pointing. Between 2 car-sized boulders, in a narrow gap, there was something dark. Clothing. Delgado was wearing a blue jacket according to his ex, I said quietly. We approached carefully. The jacket was wedged in the rocks. As we got close, I could see someone was still wearing it. Marcus Delgado had been dead for days. His body was wedged in the narrow space, positioned like he'd either fallen or deliberately crawled in. But his boots were missing. His feet were bare, pale from exposure and early decomposition. And on the rocks around him, I could see scratches that looked like they'd been made by fingernails. Deep gouges in the granite like he'd been trying to claw deeper into the rocks. Sarah radioed for assistance. I documented the scene. Recovery would be difficult given the position of the body. The medical examiner's report came back 2 weeks later. Marcus Delgado had died from exposure and dehydration, probably within 24 to 48 hours of when I found his tent. But there were details that raised questions. First, his feet showed signs of extensive walking over rough terrain while barefoot. The soles were badly abraded and cut, but his boots were never found. Second, his fingernails were broken and bloody, consistent with the scratches on the rocks. The ME said the damage suggested prolonged, frantic scratching. But here's what got me. Marcus hadn't been trapped. The space where we found him was narrow, but nothing prevented him from backing out. The ME said his body position suggested he'd deliberately crawled deeper, not tried to escape. Like he was hiding, Sarah said when I showed her the report. Hiding from what? We were the only people up there. She shook her head. I've seen a lot of bodies doing this work. Never seen someone look that scared. Even dead, you could see it in his face. I thought about the notes, about the specific timing, about it wasn't him anymore. Sarah, you ever hear of someone just leaving their boots behind? Walking out barefoot? Sure. Hypothermia causes something called paradoxical undressing. People get so cold their brains misfire and they feel like they're burning up, so they strip off clothes. But his jacket was still on, and his pants. That is weird. Usually the jacket goes first. The official cause of death was listed as accidental. The theory was Marcus Delgado, suffering from depression, went into the wilderness unprepared. During the night, he became disoriented, possibly from altitude sickness or hypothermia, and wandered from his tent. The notes were explained as confused writings of someone whose mental state was compromised. The missing boots were attributed to paradoxical undressing, even though the evidence didn't support it. The tracks at the lake were assumed to be his, though no one could explain why there was only one set. Case closed. Move on. But I couldn't move on. Something felt wrong in a way I couldn't articulate. 2 months later, I was doing another patrol on Ice Lake Trail. Early November, too late for most hikers. I was about a mile from the lake when I saw something that made me stop cold. A tent. Same cheap dome style. Same blue color. Same spot, tucked into the same cluster of white bark pines. My heart was hammering. "Hello?" I called out. "Anyone here?" No response. The door was half open, flapping in the wind. I already knew what I'd find, but my stomach still dropped when I looked inside. Empty. Sleeping bag laid out. Small backpack in the corner. And on the backpack, folded neatly, a piece of paper. My hands shook as I picked it up. Different handwriting, neater, but chillingly similar message. 2:47 a.m. She left the tent. I can hear her walking outside, but she won't answer when I call. I backed out so fast, I nearly fell. I grabbed my radio. "Stanley, I need you at Ice Lake, now." "What's wrong?" "There's another tent, another note. We have a situation." The response was immediate. Stanley mobilized every ranger available. Within 2 hours, we had a team on site, and this time, we didn't wait. We started searching immediately. The tent belonged to Claire Whitmore, age 38 from Twin Falls. We found her wallet, car keys, and phone. The phone was dead, but when we charged it, we found her last text at 11:43 p.m. the night before, to her sister. "Made it to the lake. Beautiful. Signal's spotty, but I'm fine. Love you." We searched for 3 days, dogs, helicopters, thermal imaging, ground teams. Nothing. No tracks, no body, no sign of where Claire Whitmore had gone. On the 4th day, Jonas found a boot. Women's hiking boot, fairly new, wedged between rocks about half a mile from the tent. The size matched what Claire's sister said she wore. 50 feet from the boot, scratched into a flat section of granite, was a message. It looked carved with something sharp, maybe a knife. The letters were crude but readable. "Don't look for me. It sees when you search." We photographed everything. Expanded the search. But we never found Claire Whitmore. She had vanished just as completely as Marcus Delgado. The case stayed open, but after 2 weeks with no leads, the active search was called off. Claire's family put up missing person posters. The story made regional news for a few days, then faded. For me, it never faded. I started going through old ranger reports, looking for similar cases. What I found disturbed me more than I wanted to admit. Over the past 15 years, There had been 7 other disappearances in the Sawtooth Wilderness that shared certain characteristics. All in fall or early winter. All solo hikers. All vanished without trace. In 3 cases, tents had been found with personal items inside. In 2 cases, boots were recovered far from campsites. The cases had never been connected because they were spread over years and different districts. But when you lined them up, the pattern was undeniable. I brought my findings to Stanley. We spent an afternoon going through files. "This can't be coincidence," he said finally. "No, it can't. So what are we looking at, serial killer? I don't know, but I think we need to close Ice Lake Trail." Stanley rubbed his face. "Ava, we can't close a major trail based on speculation. We need concrete evidence. 2 people vanished from the same spot in 2 months. If it's a person doing this, we need to catch them. Close the trail and they'll just move." He had a point. "So, what do we do?" "Increase patrols, warning signs, require permits and screen them carefully. Make sure no one's alone up there." That's what we did. For the rest of that season and into the next, Ice Lake Trail was the most heavily patrolled section of the Sawtooth Wilderness. We logged every hiker, checked on them regularly, made sure no one camped alone. Nothing happened. No more disappearances. No more mysterious tents. For a while, I thought maybe it was over. But then I'd remember that message scratched in granite. "It sees when you search." I retired in 2019, 3 years after Marcus Delgado disappeared. By then, the Ice Lake cases had become something of a legend among the ranger staff. New rangers would hear the stories and ask if they were true. We always said yes, but also said the trails were safe now. The patrols had worked. That was the lie we told ourselves. 2 years after I retired, I got a call from Stanley in August 2021. He sounded tired. "Ava," he said, "we've got another one." My blood went cold. "Ice Lake?" "No. Pettit Lake, 5 miles west. Same pattern. Solo hiker. Tent found. He's gone. There was a note." "What did it say?" 4:15 a.m. I can't tell which one is real. Both are calling to me. I felt the ground drop out from under me. I'd spent 3 years trying to convince myself the disappearances were anomalies, unconnected. But hearing Stanley's voice, hearing about another note with another specific time, I knew I'd been lying to myself. "Are you searching?" 4 days now, nothing. But Ava, there's more. We found a second campsite 200 yards from the first. Same cheap tent, same minimal gear, but this one had a body. I sat down. "The missing hiker?" "No, someone else. Female, dead, maybe 2 or 3 weeks based on decomposition. No ID. And Ava, she was barefoot. We found scratches on rocks nearby, just like with Delgado." "Jesus, Stanley." "Gets worse. We found her phone. Still had charge. She'd been taking videos." "Of what?" "They don't make sense. Mostly footage of trees at night, lots of movement, like she's running. But in one, you can hear her talking, terrified. She keeps saying there's 2 of them now, over and over." I couldn't speak. FBI field office in Boise is treating it as potential serial killer. They're going through all our old reports. That's good. "Is it?" Stanley sounded doubtful. "I've been doing this 30 years, dealt with all kinds of dangerous people. But this doesn't feel like a person. It feels like something else." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I've been reading those old reports. 7 disappearances over 15 years. Same strange details. They cluster. 2 or 3 in a short period, then nothing for years, then another cluster. Like something wakes up and then goes dormant." "Stanley, that's crazy. Maybe. But did you ever figure out how that second note appeared in Delgado's sleeping bag after you'd searched it? Did you explain those tracks at the lake? People do strange things when they're hypothermic. Stop. We both know something's wrong up there. Something we can't explain away. I wanted to argue, but I couldn't. Because I'd been thinking the same thing for 5 years. What do you want me to do? Come back. Help me figure this out. You know that area better than anyone. I should have said no. I was retired. Not my problem anymore. But I thought about Marcus Delgado scratching at those rocks. About Claire Whitmore's message carved in granite. About that woman's voice saying, "There's 2 of them now. I'll be there tomorrow." The next day, I drove to the Sawtooth Ranger Station. Stanley had all the files spread out. We spent hours going through them. What we found was a pattern. When we plotted all the disappearance sites on a topographical map, they formed a rough circle about 8 miles in diameter, centered on Ice Lake. Territorial, Stanley said. Whatever this is has a range. We're not seriously entertaining the idea this is some kind of creature. Then explain the notes. The missing boots. How Claire Whitmore carved that message and disappeared so completely. I couldn't. What about the most recent victim, the one you found dead? Me identified her this morning. Rebecca Sandoval, 29, from Seattle. Reported missing by her roommate 6 weeks ago. Said Rebecca went on a solo hike and never came back. 6 weeks. But she'd only been dead 2 or 3? Stanley nodded. Yeah, she survived out there at least 3 weeks before dying. Question is how and why didn't she hike out? The videos show anything else? Want to see them? I didn't, but I nodded. Stanley pulled out a laptop and opened a file. Timestamp 2:47 a.m. The video was dark, lit by phone flashlight. It showed trees, lodgepole pine bark catching light. The camera moved erratically like someone walking fast or running. Heavy breathing. Then Rebecca's voice. I don't understand. She's me. She looks exactly like me, but she's just standing there, won't talk, just stands and stares, and I don't... The video cut off. Stanley opened another file. 3:12 a.m., same date, more trees. Heavy breathing. Rebecca's voice near panic. There's 2 of them now, one of me and one of... I don't know what he is, but he has my face too. They're just standing there watching. Why won't they move? Brief glimpse of what might have been a figure in darkness. Too dark to be sure. Third video, 4:03 a.m. They're getting closer. Every time I turn around, they're closer. I'm running, but I hear them behind me. They're not running, just walking, but keeping up. How are they keeping up? Last video, time-stamped 4:44 a.m. No audio, just video. It showed a narrow space between boulders, lit by phone light. Camera pushed forward into the space like Rebecca was crawling in. The angle showed rock on all sides getting narrower. Then the light moved erratically, like the phone was dropped. For just a moment before it cut off, the light bounced back and illuminated something. A face, but not quite right. Human features, but proportions slightly off, like looking at yourself in a funhouse mirror. And smiling, a wide, impossible smile showing too many teeth. Stanley closed the laptop. We sat in silence. Could be anything, I said. Trick of light, her reflection. You keep saying that, but you can't say what. He was right. FBI's shutting down the trail, officially closing it to public access pending investigation, bringing in agents for comprehensive search. Good, but I don't think they'll find anything, just like we haven't, because I don't think this is something you can catch. I think it's something you avoid. By not going up there, by not going alone, Every victim was solo, every single one. I'd noticed. So, it targets solo hikers. Or can't approach groups. Maybe numbers protect you. That's ridiculous. Is it? You saw those videos. Rebecca saying they have my face. I wanted to argue, but I was thinking about those videos, about the face that wasn't quite right. I need to see where you found her body. Stanley drove us to Pettit Lake the next morning. FBI had released the scene but left markers showing where Rebecca had been found. Remarkably similar to where we found Marcus Delgado. Narrow space between boulders, barely wide enough for a person. She was wedged in deep, Stanley said. Crawled in as far as she could. The scratches on rocks were all directed inward, trying to go deeper, not get out. Hiding. From what? I looked at the forest, the granite peaks, the pristine wilderness that had been my home for 11 years. It looked the same as always. Beautiful, peaceful, but I knew better. I don't know, but I think it's still here. Then I heard something that made my skin crawl. Footsteps. Someone walking through trees nearby. Regular, even steps, not trying to hide. Stanley heard it too. His hand went to his radio. "Hello," he called. "This area's closed." The footsteps stopped. Silence. Then a voice called back, "I'm lost. Can you help me?" It was my voice, my exact voice. Stanley went pale. He looked at me, and I looked at him. "Please," the voice called again. Still my voice. "I've been walking for hours. Can't find the trail." Stanley keyed his radio quietly. "All units need immediate backup at Pettit Lake." "Please," the voice called a third time. "Why won't you help me?" Then a second voice, also mine. "She won't help because she knows. She's seen the notes." My hands were shaking. Stanley grabbed my arm. "We're leaving, now." Someone's messing with us, playing a recording. Does that sound like a recording? It didn't. It sounded like me, standing 50 yards away in those trees. Except I was standing right here. We backed away slowly, keeping eyes on the tree line. Part of me expected to see someone step out. Part of me was terrified about what I'd see. We made it to Stanley's truck. The drive down was silent. That night, I did something stupid. I drove back to Ice Lake Trailhead alone, after midnight. The parking area was empty, yellow tape across the trail entrance, warning signs everywhere. I ducked under the tape and started hiking. I don't know what I was trying to prove. Maybe that it was all in our heads. Maybe I just needed to face whatever was up there. The hike in darkness was eerie but familiar. I'd walked this trail hundreds of times. Even without a headlamp, I could navigate by memory and moonlight. Took about 2 hours to reach where Marcus Delgado had set up his tent. The site was empty now. I stood there in darkness, listening to wind and pines, thinking about that first note. 3:12 a.m., he went out, didn't come back. I checked my watch, 2:47 a.m., that's when I heard footsteps. Someone walking up the trail behind me. Regular, even steps. I turned slowly. There was someone standing about 30 feet away, silhouetted by moonlight. I couldn't make out details, but I could see it was a person, standing completely still, watching me. "Who are you?" My voice cracked. The figure didn't respond, didn't move. I pulled out my flashlight and clicked it on, pointing it at the figure. It was me, not someone who looked like me. It was me, down to the scar on my left cheek from a branch strike 10 years ago. Down to the way I stand with weight slightly more on my right leg from an old knee injury. We stared at each other. Then it smiled. The same smile from Rebecca's video. Too wide, too many teeth. "You came back," it said in my voice. We always come back. I ran down that trail as fast as I could in darkness, branches whipping my face, breath coming in gasps. I could hear footsteps behind me, not running, just walking, but keeping pace, didn't stop until I reached my truck, fumbled with keys, got in, locked doors. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in ignition. In the rearview mirror, I saw a figure emerge from the trailhead. It stood at the edge of the parking area, watching. As I threw the truck in reverse and my headlights swept across it, I saw it one more time. It was waving, the way I would wave, the gesture I've used 1,000 times to say goodbye to hikers. I drove straight to Stanley's house and pounded on his door. Nearly 4 a.m. When he saw my face, he didn't ask questions, just let me in and made coffee. I told him everything. About going up alone, about seeing it, about running. "You're lucky," he said. "Lucky you ran." "What is it, Stanley?" He was quiet for a long time. "I've been doing research. Called colleagues, reached out to rangers in other parks. This isn't unique to the Sawtooths, stories from all over. Different names, different descriptions. Same pattern. Something that copies people, something that lures solo hikers. That's folklore. Urban legends. Is it? You saw it? I heard your voice from those trees." I couldn't argue. "There's a Shoshone legend," Stanley continued, "about something called the face thief. Lives in high places, remote places, steals faces. Becomes you, perfectly, then uses your face to lure others. That's insane. Maybe. But Rebecca said they have my face. Those notes, it wasn't him anymore. What if that's literal? What if something copies these people and the real person knows, and that's why they hide? Why they crawl into those spaces?" I thought about Marcus Delgado scratching at granite, trying to go deeper. Not escaping, hiding. "If this is real," I said slowly, "then everyone who disappeared is either dead somewhere we haven't found," Stanley finished, "or still up there, hiding." We sat with that. "FBI needs to know," I said. "They won't believe it." "Then what do we do?" "Make sure no one goes up alone. Ever. Close the trails. Patrol constantly. Hope it goes dormant again." But I was thinking about that figure at the trailhead, waving goodbye, wearing my face. "Stanley, how do we know it stays in the mountains? If it can copy people perfectly, how do we know it doesn't follow them down?" He didn't have an answer. It's been 4 years since that night. Ice Lake Trail remains closed. The FBI investigation concluded the disappearances were likely a serial killer, though they never found a suspect. I still live near the Sawtooths, still see them every day, those beautiful jagged peaks. But I don't hike alone anymore. Don't hike those trails at all. Sometimes I wonder about the others. 7 from old cases, plus Marcus, Claire, and Rebecca. I wonder if they're still up there, hiding in narrow spaces, waiting for something that wears their face to lose interest. And sometimes, late at night, I think about that figure at the trailhead, how perfectly it copied me, how it knew just how I would stand, how I would wave. I think about it and wonder, if it can copy people that perfectly, how would you know? If you ran into your friend on a trail, or your spouse came home from a hike, how would you know it was really them? You wouldn't, not until it was too late. So, I'm sharing this as a warning. If you hike in remote areas, don't go alone. If someone you know goes solo and comes back acting strange, pay attention. And if you ever see someone who looks exactly like you standing in the distance, watching, run. Don't try to understand. Don't try to rationalize. Just run. And don't stop until you're far from that place. Because some things in wilderness aren't meant to be understood. Some things are just meant to be avoided. Ice Lake Trail remains closed to this day, and it should stay that way. My name is Cole Whitner, and I worked as a backcountry ranger in Idaho's Sawtooth Wilderness for 8 years before I transferred to a desk job in Boise. People ask me why I left, and I usually tell them something about wanting to be closer to family or needing better pay. But that's not the whole truth. The real reason I left the backcountry has to do with a night patrol in October of 2017, and a sound I still hear sometimes when I'm trying to fall asleep. I came across your channel last week when my nephew was watching it. He's really into these kinds of stories, the unexplained encounters, the things that don't quite make sense. When I heard the narrator talking about a ranger who experienced something they couldn't explain, I thought maybe it was time I shared what happened to me. Maybe getting it out there will help me stop thinking about it so much. The Sawtooth Wilderness is about 750 square miles of some of the most remote terrain in Idaho. Jagged granite peaks, alpine lakes, dense pine forests, and miles of trails that see maybe a dozen hikers a week outside of peak season. By October, most of the tourists are gone. The nights drop below freezing. The days are short, and you can hike for hours without seeing another person. It's beautiful, but it's also the kind of place where if something goes wrong, you're very much on your own. I was stationed at the Stanley Ranger Station, and my primary responsibility was patrolling the northern section of the wilderness, which included an area called Granite Pass. The pass sits at about 8,900 feet elevation, connecting two valleys through a narrow corridor of rock and stunted trees. It's not a popular route, too steep for casual hikers, and by late October most people with any sense avoid it entirely, because early snow can make it treacherous. On October 23, 2017, I was scheduled for a routine overnight patrol of Granite Pass and the surrounding area. These patrols were standard procedure, checking for late-season hikers who might be unprepared for conditions, looking for any signs of illegal camping or fires, making sure the trail markers were still intact. I'd done dozens of them before without incident. I started the hike around 3 in the afternoon, giving myself plenty of time to reach the pass before dark. The weather was cold but clear, no snow in the forecast, just that crisp autumn air that smells like pine and granite. I was carrying standard patrol gear: radio, first aid kit, emergency supplies, headlamp, and my service pistol, though I'd never had to use it for anything more than putting down an injured animal. The trail up to Granite Pass climbs steadily through lodgepole pine forest for about 4 miles before breaking out above tree line. Once you're above the trees, it's all exposed granite and scattered white bark pines, twisted by wind into strange shapes. The views are spectacular if you're into that sort of thing, all jagged peaks and deep valleys. I reached the pass around 6:30, just as the sun was setting. The temperature was dropping fast, probably already in the low 30s. I found a decent spot to set up camp about 50 yards off the trail, sheltered by a cluster of rocks that would block some of the wind. I got my tent up, started a small stove to heat water for dinner, and settled in to do some paperwork by headlamp. That's when I heard the bell. It was faint at first, just a single, clear tone that rang out across the pass. The kind of sound a small bell makes, like the one some hikers put on their packs to warn bears. I turned off my stove and listened. The sound came again after maybe 10 seconds. A single ring, clear and distinct. I grabbed my radio and keyed it. "Stanley Base, this is Whitner. You copy?" Static, then, "Copy, Cole. What's your status?" "I'm set up at Granite Pass. Just heard what sounds like a bear bell. Checking to see if we have any late hikers registered for this area." "Stand by." I could hear papers rustling on the other end. The bell rang again. Definitely closer than before, or at least it seemed that way. Sound does weird things in the mountains, bouncing off rock faces carrying for miles sometimes. Negative on registered hikers, the voice came back. Last permit for that area was 4 days ago, and they're already checked out. Copy that. I'm going to do a quick sweep, make sure no one's out here unprepared. Roger. Check in every 30. I grabbed my flashlight and headed in the direction the sound had come from. The bell rang again as I was walking, and this time I was sure it was closer. I called out as I moved. Hello? Ranger station. Anyone out here? No response. Just the wind moving through the rocks and the crunch of my boots on loose gravel. I swept my flashlight across the landscape, looking for any sign of a camp, a person, anything. The beam caught on granite, on stunted trees, on patches of old snow in shaded areas, but nothing that looked like a hiker. The bell rang again. This time, it sounded like it was behind me. I turned around quickly, swinging my flashlight. Nothing. Just my own camp about 30 yards away, my tent a small orange dome in the darkness. Hello? I called again, louder this time. If you need assistance, identify yourself. Silence. I stood there for a full minute listening, watching. The wind had picked up, making the trees creak and whisper, but I didn't hear the bell again. I swept the area one more time with my light, saw nothing, and headed back to my camp. I radioed in my status. Nothing visible. Could have been a hiker passing through or just the wind moving something metallic. Returning to camp. Copy that. Stay alert. I finished making my dinner, but I'll admit I wasn't paying much attention to it. I kept listening for that bell, kept glancing out into the darkness beyond my headlamp's reach. It was probably nothing, I told myself. Sound carries strangely in the mountains. Could have been a hiker miles away. Could have been the wind rattling something. Could have been a lot of things. Around 9 p.m. I heard it again. This time, there was no mistaking it. The bell was close, maybe 20 yards from my tent. A single clear ring that seemed to hang in the cold air. I grabbed my flashlight and unzipped my tent, stepping out into the night. "Who's there?" I called out. "Identify yourself." The bell rang again. Closer. Maybe 15 yards now, off to my left. I swung my light in that direction, illuminating a section of granite slope dotted with small trees. Nothing moved. No one was there. "This isn't funny," I shouted. "If you need help, I'm a ranger. Come into the light." The bell rang again. This time from my right, still about 15 yards away. I spun, light following my movement. Again, nothing, just rock and trees and darkness. My heart was starting to pound now. This wasn't right. No way someone could move that fast, that quietly, across this terrain. The ground was all loose rock and gravel. You couldn't walk on it without making noise. And my light should have caught them moving. I pulled my radio. "Stanley Base, this is Whitner. I've got a situation here." "Go ahead." "I'm hearing that bell again, multiple times, close to my position, but I can't see anyone. Sounds moving around me." There was a pause. Could it be an animal? Sometimes elk or deer will get into someone's gear, might have a bell attached. Maybe. I swept my light around the perimeter again. But it's moving too deliberately, too regular. "Do you feel threatened?" That was the question, wasn't it? Did I feel threatened? The honest answer was yes, but I couldn't explain why. Nothing had actually happened. It was just a sound, just a bell ringing. "Not directly," I said. "But something's not right up here. Do you want to abort the patrol, come back down?" I thought about it. It was a 6-mile hike back to the trailhead in the dark, over rough terrain. If I left now, I'd look like I'd panicked over nothing, and what would I put in my report? That I heard a bell and got scared? Negative. I said. "I'll maintain position. Just wanted you aware of the situation." "Roger. We'll keep this channel open. Check in every 15. I sat down on a rock near my tent and waited. The bell didn't ring again for almost 20 minutes. When it did, it was further away, maybe 50 yards. Then it rang again from a different direction. Then again from another direction. Each time a single clear tone, never repeating from the same location. I spent the next hour tracking that sound around the pass. Every time I moved toward it, it would ring from somewhere else. It was like playing a game with something I couldn't see, something that was staying just out of reach. I never saw anything, never heard footsteps, never caught a glimpse of movement in my light. Just that bell, ringing through the darkness. Around 11 p.m., I gave up trying to find it and returned to my tent. I radioed in to let base know I was standing down from the search. They asked if I wanted backup, but what would backup do? Come up here and listen to a bell with me? "Negative on backup," I said. "I'm securing camp for the night. We'll resume patrol at first light." "Copy. Stay safe, Cole." I crawled into my tent and tried to get some sleep, but every time I started to drift off, I'd hear it. That single ring, cutting through the night. Sometimes close, sometimes far. Never regular, never predictable. Just there, reminding me that something was out in the darkness. Around 2 a.m., I heard something else. Footsteps. Not the bell this time, but the distinct crunch of boots on gravel, moving past my tent. I grabbed my flashlight and opened the tent flap. "Hello?" The footsteps stopped. I shined my light in the direction they'd come from. Nothing. I swept the light in a wide arc. Still nothing. Then the bell rang, right next to my tent. So close it sounded like it was just outside the fabric. I felt my breath catch in my throat. I shined the light directly at where the sound had come from. Empty ground, just rock and dirt. No person. No animal. Nothing that could have made that sound. I didn't sleep after that. I sat in my tent with my flashlight on, listening to that bell move around the pass, getting closer and further, never staying in one place. Sometimes it would be silent for 30 minutes, and I'd start to think maybe it was over. Then it would ring again, closer than before, and I'd feel my hands start shaking. When the first light of dawn started to creep across the pass, the bell rang one last time. Far away now, down in the valley to the east. Then nothing. Just silence and the morning wind. I packed up my gear as soon as it was light enough to see. My hands were stiff from cold and from gripping my flashlight all night. I should have done a proper patrol sweep, checked the area, looked for signs of whoever or whatever had been making that sound. But I'll be honest, I just wanted to get out of there. I was rolling up my tent when something caught my eye. About 10 feet from where I'd been camped, tucked under a low bush, there was something that didn't belong. I walked over and crouched down to look at it. It was a bell clapper, the metal piece that hangs inside a bell and strikes it to make sound. This one was old, brass or bronze maybe, with a patina of age on it. And it was broken, snapped cleanly in half. I stared at it for a long moment. If the clapper was broken, how had I been hearing a bell all night? I picked it up, wrapped it in a plastic evidence bag, and put it in my pack. Then I finished breaking camp and started the hike down. I made it back to the Stanley Ranger Station by 9 a.m. My supervisor, Jack Morrison, was in the office when I walked in. He took one look at me and frowned. Rough night? You could say that. I dropped my pack on the floor and sat down heavily in a chair. The overnight patrol report said you had some unusual activity at Granite Pass. Want to tell me about it? So I did. I told him about the bell, about how it moved around the pass, about the footsteps I'd heard, about finding the broken clapper. As I talked, I could see his expression shift from concern to skeptical. "And you never saw anyone?" he asked when I finished. "Never. Not once. Just heard the bell and the footsteps. Could have been an animal. Mountain lion, maybe, with someone's gear it picked up. For 8 hours? Moving in a pattern around my camp? Jack, I know what animals sound like. This was different." He leaned back in his chair and sighed. "Cole, I'm not doubting what you heard, but you've got to understand how this sounds. You spent the night at Granite Pass, heard some noises, found an old piece of metal, and now you're telling me something was out there that you couldn't see or identify. I know how it sounds, but I'm telling you, something wasn't right up there. Did you feel like you were in danger?" I felt like I was being watched, like something was playing games with me. Jack rubbed his face. "All right. Write up a full report, include everything you told me, and show me that clapper you found." I pulled the evidence bag from my pack and handed it to him. He held it up to the light, turning it over. "Looks old," he said. "Could have been up there for years. Decades even. Maybe. But I found it right near my camp, and I checked that area when I set up. I would have seen it." "You checked that area in daylight or with a flashlight?" "Flashlight. There you go. Could have missed it easily in the dark." I wanted to argue, but what was the point? He'd already made up his mind that there was a logical explanation for everything. And maybe there was. Maybe I just had a weird night. Let my imagination run wild because I was alone in the dark. "Finish your report," Jack said, handing the bag back to me. "Log that clapper in evidence, note where you found it. And Cole, maybe take the rest of the day off. Get some sleep, you look like hell." I went home and tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I heard that bell. I'd drift off for maybe 20 minutes, then jerk awake, convinced I'd heard it ringing right outside my window. By evening, I gave up and just stayed up, watching television and trying not to think about Granite Pass. The next day, I was scheduled for desk duty, which I was grateful for. I caught up on paperwork, filed my report about the overnight patrol, and tried to put the whole experience out of my mind. Jack never mentioned it again, and neither did anyone else. As far as everyone at the station was concerned, I'd had a weird night, heard some strange sounds, and that was that. But I couldn't let it go. That broken clapper kept bothering me. How had I heard a bell if the clapper was broken? And why had the sound moved around like that, staying just out of sight? A week after the patrol, I was going through some old incident reports and I found something that made my blood run cold. 3 years earlier, in October of 2014, a ranger named Mara Keegan had filed a report about an overnight patrol at Granite Pass. The report was brief, just a note that she'd heard unusual sounds during the night and cut her patrol short. I pulled up Mara's contact information. She'd transferred to another district 2 years ago, was now working in the Bitterroot Wilderness up in Montana. I debated calling her, wondering if I was just being paranoid, but finally I decided I needed to know if what happened to me had happened to someone else. I called her number on my personal phone that evening. She answered on the third ring. "Mara Keegan." "Hi, Mara. My name is Cole Whitner. I'm a ranger at Stanley Station in the Sawtooths. You worked here a few years back, right?" "Yeah, transferred out in 2015. What can I do for you?" "This is going to sound strange, but I came across an incident report you filed about a patrol at Granite Pass. October 2014. Do you remember that?" There was a long pause on the other end. "Why are you asking?" "Because I just did an overnight patrol there, and I had something weird happen. Heard sounds I couldn't explain, found something unusual. Your report mentioned unusual sounds too, and I was wondering if you could tell me more about what you experienced." Another pause, longer this time. I don't really talk about that night. Look, I'm not trying to dredge up bad memories. But if what happened to you is similar to what happened to me, I think we should compare notes. Why? So people can think we're both crazy? Did someone call you crazy? Not in so many words. But let's just say my report wasn't taken very seriously. I was told I probably heard an animal, or the wind, or my own imagination. So I stopped talking about it. What did you hear, Mara? She sighed. A bell. A single bell, ringing through the pass. All night long. I never saw what was making the sound, never found any explanation. It drove me half out of my mind. My grip tightened on the phone. Did you find anything? Any evidence? Yeah. A broken piece of metal under a bush near my camp. Looked like part of a bell. Why? Did you find something too? Same thing. Broken bell clapper right near my campsite. Jesus Christ. Her voice had dropped to almost a whisper. Cole, I need to tell you something, and you're probably going to think I'm insane. After that night at Granite Pass, I did some research. Talked to some of the older rangers, the ones who'd been working the Sawtooths for decades, and one of them told me a story. What kind of story? Back in the 1950s, there was a search and rescue operation at Granite Pass. A woman had gone hiking alone, got caught in an early snowstorm. They organized a search party, had volunteers coming up from all the nearby towns. The woman's husband was part of the search, and he brought a brass bell that he would ring periodically, hoping she'd hear it and respond. Did they find her? No. Search went on for 3 days before they called it off. Too much snow, too dangerous. The woman was never found. But on the last day of the search, the husband was walking the pass one more time, ringing his bell. He lost his footing on some ice, fell about 200 feet down a granite face, died on impact. I felt something cold settling in my stomach. And the bell? No one ever found it. They recovered his body, but the bell was gone. Could have fallen anywhere, could have been buried in snow. But the story goes that sometimes, on cold October nights, you can still hear that bell ringing through Granite Pass. The husband still searching for his wife. That's just a story, I said. But my voice didn't sound convinced even to my own ears. Maybe. But I heard that bell, Cole. And from your call, sounds like you did too. And we both found broken pieces of metal that shouldn't have been there. There has to be a logical explanation. I used to think that too. Spent months trying to rationalize it. Acoustic anomaly, temperature inversion causing sound to carry from miles away. Metal expansion and contraction making pinging sounds. I came up with a dozen theories, but none of them explained why the sound moved. Why it stayed just out of sight, why it felt like something was watching me. You felt that too? Every second of that night. Like I was being circled by something that wanted me to know it was there but wouldn't show itself. We were both quiet for a moment. Finally, Mara spoke again. Cole, I transferred out of the Sawtooths because of that night. I know that sounds extreme, but I couldn't go back up there. Couldn't face another overnight patrol knowing what I'd heard. And I'm not the only one. That old ranger who told me the story, he said 3 other rangers over the years had reported similar experiences at Granite Pass. All of them in October. All of them heard a bell. Did any of them find pieces of the bell? Like we did? He didn't say. But Cole, here's what really bothers me. If we both found broken pieces, and those pieces were from the same bell, why does it still ring? I didn't have an answer for that. After I hung up with Mara, I sat in my apartment for a long time thinking. Part of me wanted to dismiss the whole thing as coincidence, or mass hysteria, or some natural phenomenon we didn't understand. But I kept coming back to that broken clapper, to the way the sound had moved through the pass, to the footsteps I'd heard walking past my tent. The next morning, I went to the station early. Jack wasn't in yet, so I went to the records room and started pulling old incident reports for Granite Pass. I went back 10 years looking for anything unusual, any mention of strange sounds or unexplained phenomena. Most reports were routine. Normal patrols, nothing noteworthy. But every few years, in October, there would be a brief note. Unusual sounds heard during overnight patrol. Possible animal activity near camp. Cut patrol short due to unsettling conditions. Nothing explicit, nothing that would raise red flags. But the pattern was there if you were looking for it. Every 2 or 3 years, someone would have a strange experience at Granite Pass. And it was always in October. I made copies of all the relevant reports and took them home. That evening, I started making calls. I tracked down 2 of the rangers who'd filed reports, both now retired. The first one remembered hearing something during his patrol but couldn't recall details. Said it was probably nothing, just the isolation getting to him. The second ranger, a woman named Dorothy Price who'd worked the Sawtooths in the 90s, was more forthcoming. "I heard a bell," she said without hesitation. October of '96. Spent the whole night listening to it ring through the pass. Never saw what was making the sound. Never wanted to go back up there after that. Did you find anything? Any evidence of what might have been making the noise? Found a piece of metal near my camp. Looked like it might have been from a bell. I turned it into the station, but I don't know what happened to it after that. Did anyone tell you about the story? About the search and rescue in the 50s? Not until years later. Another ranger mentioned it in passing. Said Granite Pass was supposed to be haunted or some nonsense. I didn't believe it at the time, but after hearing that bell myself, I don't know. Something's up there, whether you want to call it a ghost or an echo or whatever. After I hung up with Dorothy, I sat at my kitchen table with all the reports spread out in front of me. The pattern was undeniable. Every few years, someone would go up to Granite Pass in October and hear a bell. Most of them didn't report it officially, or wrote it off as wind or animals. The ones who did report it were told they'd probably heard something natural, some acoustic trick. But we'd all heard the same thing, a single bell ringing through the darkness. And several of us had found broken pieces of metal near our camps. I needed to know more. I needed to understand what was actually happening up there. The next weekend, I drove to the local historical society in Stanley. It was a small building, mostly maintained by volunteers, but they had archives going back to the town's founding in the late 1800s. I told the woman at the desk I was researching a search and rescue operation from the 1950s. She led me to a back room filled with filing cabinets and old newspaper archives. "What specifically are you looking for?" "A missing person case. Woman went missing at Granite Pass. Husband died during the search. Would have been in October, probably 1952 or 1953. She thought for a moment, then pulled out a drawer. "I think I know the one you mean. Tragic story. Let me see." She flipped through files until she found what she was looking for. "Here, October 1952. Catherine and James Pritchard." She handed me a thin folder. Inside were newspaper clippings, search reports, and a few photographs. I spread them out on a table and started reading. Catherine Pritchard, age 27, had gone hiking alone at Granite Pass on October 19, 1952. She was supposed to return by evening but never showed up. Her husband, James, age 31, reported her missing the next morning. A search party was organized immediately. The first 2 days of searching turned up nothing. On the third day, an early winter storm moved in, dropping nearly 2 feet of snow and making the terrain extremely dangerous. The search coordinator recommended calling off the operation, but James Pritchard refused to give up. On October 22nd, James went up to Granite Pass alone, against the advice of everyone involved. He carried a brass bell that had belonged to his wife, ringing it every few minutes in hopes she would hear it and respond. He never came back. Searchers found his body the next morning at the base of a cliff on the west side of the pass. He'd slipped on ice and fallen nearly 200 feet. The brass bell was never recovered. Catherine's body was found the following spring, when the snow melted. She'd fallen into a crevasse about half a mile from where James had died. The coroner determined she'd died from exposure and injuries from the fall, probably within hours of going missing. I stared at the photographs in the file. James Pritchard looked like an ordinary guy, young and hopeful in his wedding photo. Catherine was smiling, pretty, holding a bouquet of wildflowers. They'd been married less than 2 years when she died. There was one more document in the file, a handwritten note from one of the search party members. On the final morning of the search, as we were recovering James's body, several of us heard a bell ringing from further up the pass. We thought perhaps someone else was out there, another searcher we didn't know about. But when we checked, there was no one. The sound continued for several minutes, then stopped. We never found the source. I closed the folder and sat back. So the story was true. James Pritchard had died searching for his wife, and his bell had never been found. But that didn't explain why people kept hearing it 65 years later. And it definitely didn't explain the broken pieces we kept finding. I thanked the Historical Society volunteer and drove back home. I needed to talk to someone about this, someone who might be able to offer a different perspective. I called Mara again. "Cole, what's up?" I did some research. The story about the husband and wife, it's real. James and Catherine Pritchard, October 1952. He died searching for her with a brass bell, and people have been hearing that bell ever since. Apparently, I found reports going back years, all describing the same thing. Always in October, always at Granite Pass. So, what do you think it is? You believe in ghosts now? I don't know what I believe, but I think I need to go back up there. What? Cole, why would you do that? Because I need to understand what's happening. Is it some acoustic phenomenon? Is it multiple people independently finding pieces of an old bell and their minds playing tricks on them? Is it something else entirely? I can't just let this go. And if it is a ghost, if James Pritchard really is still up there searching for his wife, then maybe I can help put him to rest. Mara was quiet for a moment. That's either very brave or very stupid. I'm not sure which. Probably stupid. But will you help me? Come back down here, come up to the pass with me. 2 people, 2 witnesses. If we both experience the same thing, we'll know it's not just in our heads. Cole, I told you I transferred out because of that night. I'm not going back up there. Even to finally get answers? Another long pause, then, damn it, fine. But if we do this, we do it right. We bring recording equipment, we document everything, and if either of us feels like we're in danger, we leave immediately. Agreed. When can you get here? Give me a week to arrange time off. And Cole, I really hope we find some boring, rational explanation for all this. Me too. 1 week later, Mara drove down from Montana. We met at the Stanley Ranger Station, where I'd already cleared our overnight patrol with Jack. I hadn't told him the real reason we were going up there, just said I wanted a second opinion on the area after my previous experience. We spent the afternoon going over our equipment. Standard camping gear, plus video cameras with night vision capability, audio recording equipment, and handheld radios. We packed more gear than we'd normally take on a patrol, but we wanted to be prepared for whatever we might encounter. We started hiking at 3 p.m., giving us plenty of time to reach the pass before dark. The weather was cold and clear, just like it had been during my first patrol. October in the Sawtooths can be unpredictable, but we'd gotten lucky with conditions. Mara didn't talk much as we hiked, I could tell she was nervous, though she was trying to hide it. We'd both heard that bell, both found pieces of what might be the original brass bell James Pritchard had carried. Now we were going back to see if it would happen again. We reached Granite Pass around 6:30, just as the sun was setting. We set up camp in the same area where I'd been before, then arranged our recording equipment in a wide circle around our tents. If anything moved through the area, we'd have it on camera. "Now what?" Mara asked, as we sat by a small camp stove, heating water for dinner. "Now we wait." The first hour passed quietly. We ate dinner, checked our equipment, made sure our radios were working. The temperature dropped into the 20s as full darkness fell. Above us, the stars were brilliant, so many that the Milky Way looked like a river of light across the sky. At 8:15 p.m., we heard the first ring. It was exactly as I remembered. A single, clear tone coming from somewhere out in the darkness. Mara and I looked at each other. "You heard that?" she asked quietly. "Yeah." The bell rang again. Further away now, maybe 50 yards to the north. Mara grabbed one of the video cameras and pointed it in that direction, switching on the night vision mode. I watched the small screen on the back of the camera. It showed the granite landscape in shades of green and gray, but no movement, no heat signature, nothing that might be making the sound. The bell rang again from a different direction, east this time. We turned the camera, but again saw nothing. "This is exactly what happened to me," Mara said. Her voice was steady, but I could hear the tension in it. "It's going to keep doing this, moving around us, staying just out of sight. Let's try to follow it. Cole, we tried that last time. Both of us. It doesn't work. We have better equipment now, and there's 2 of us." She hesitated, then nodded. "All right, but we stay together, no splitting up." We grabbed flashlights and one of the video cameras, then headed in the direction of the last ring. The bell sounded again as we walked, now behind us. We turned back, following the sound. It rang again from our left. For the next 30 minutes, we chased that sound around the pass. Every time we got close to where it seemed to be, it would ring from somewhere else. The video camera showed nothing. Our flashlights illuminated empty ground. Whatever was making that sound remained invisible. Finally, exhausted and frustrated, we returned to camp. The bell continued to ring, sometimes close, sometimes far, moving in a pattern we couldn't predict. "This is insane," Mara said, sitting down heavily on a rock. "There's nothing out there. Nothing we can see anyway. But the sound is real. We're both hearing it. The camera's picking it up on audio. So what the hell is making it? I don't know. But I want to try something." "What?" I pulled out the broken bell clapper I'd found on my first patrol, still in its evidence bag. "You found a piece of the bell too, right? Do you still have it?" "No, turned it into the station. Why?" "Because maybe these pieces are connected to what's happening. Maybe finding them triggers something." "That doesn't make any sense." "None of this makes sense, Mara, but I want to try something. I want to put this back where I found it. See if it changes anything. You think returning it will make the sound stop? I don't know, but it's worth trying." I walked to the spot where I'd found the clapper, about 10 feet from where we'd set up camp. The bell was still ringing periodically in the distance. I crouched down and placed the broken piece of metal back under the bush where I'd found it, then returned to camp. We waited. The bell continued to ring, moving through the pass. 5 minutes passed. 10. Then 15. Then the sound changed. Instead of a single ring, we heard 2 rings in quick succession, closer than before. Then 3 rings, then 4. The bell was ringing faster now, multiple times, like someone shaking it violently. Cole, what did you do? Mara's voice was tight with fear. I don't know. I just put it back. The ringing got louder, closer. Now it sounded like it was right at the edge of our camp, just beyond the reach of our flashlights. The sound was almost frantic, rings coming one after another without pause. Then it stopped. Complete silence. No wind, no bell, nothing. Mara and I sat frozen, hardly breathing, waiting for the sound to start again. A full minute passed, then 2. Is it over? Mara whispered. Then we heard footsteps. They were coming from the north, from the direction of the cliff face where James Pritchard had died. Slow, deliberate steps, boots on gravel. Getting closer. I grabbed my flashlight and pointed it toward the sound. The beam illuminated granite and scattered trees, and then, at the very edge of the light, I saw something, a figure, standing about 30 yards away. Too far to make out details, but definitely a person. Standing, completely still, just watching us. "Hello?" I called out, my voice cracking. "Who's there?" The figure didn't respond, didn't move, just stood there, silent and still. Mara had the video camera pointed at it, the night vision showing the figure in more detail. On the small screen, I could see it was wearing old-style clothing, the kind someone might have worn in the 1950s. The figure's head was tilted slightly, like it was listening to something. Then it raised its arm. In its hand was a bell. I could see it clearly on the video screen. A brass bell glinting faintly in the night vision display. The figure rang the bell once. The sound was clear and loud, the same sound we'd been hearing all night. "James?" Mara whispered. "Is that James Pritchard?" The figure rang the bell again. Then it turned and walked away, moving along the granite face toward the east. Not hurrying, just walking, ringing the bell every few steps. We watched on the video screen until it disappeared around a rock formation. The bell rang a few more times, getting fainter and fainter until finally we couldn't hear it anymore. Mara and I sat in silence for a long time. Finally, she turned off the camera and looked at me. "That was him," she said quietly. "That was James Pritchard. Still searching for his wife after all these years." I nodded slowly. "The broken pieces we found. Maybe they're from when he fell. The bell broke apart on impact, scattered across the pass. But somehow he's still carrying it, still ringing it. Do you think he knows she's dead? That she was found? I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe that's why he keeps searching. Because he never found her himself." We didn't sleep that night. We sat by our camp stove, keeping the area lit, and talked quietly about what we'd seen. The video camera had captured everything, the figure and the bell clearly visible on the recording. We had evidence now, proof that something unexplainable was happening at Granite Pass. Around 3 a.m., Mara stood up suddenly. "Cole, I need to check something." "Check what?" "The piece you put back, the broken clapper. I want to see if it's still there." I didn't want to, but I grabbed my flashlight and followed her to the bush where I'd placed it. We crouched down and I shined the light underneath. The clapper was gone. "It was right here," I said, moving the light around the area. "I put it exactly in this spot." Mara ran her hand through the dead pine needles and dirt. "Nothing. It's completely gone. Maybe an animal took it." "An animal?" "Cole, that was a piece of metal. What animal would take a piece of metal?" She had a point. We searched the surrounding area for 10 minutes but found nothing. The broken clapper had simply vanished. "Maybe that's what he was looking for," Mara said quietly. "Not just Catherine. Maybe he's been looking for pieces of his bell too, the one that broke when he fell. You think he took it back? I think when you returned it, you gave him something he'd been searching for. And when the ringing got frantic, maybe that was him finally finding it. I thought about the figure we'd seen, walking away with the bell. Had it been whole? I tried to remember the video footage, but I'd been too focused on the figure itself to notice details about the bell it was carrying. We went back to camp and I pulled up the video on the camera's small screen, rewinding to the moment when we'd first seen the figure. I zoomed in as much as the camera would allow. There, in the figure's hand, was the bell. And even in the grainy night vision footage, I could see it more clearly now. It wasn't whole. There were pieces missing, gaps in the brass where it had been damaged, but it was more complete than a broken clapper lying under a bush. Look, I said, showing Mara, the bell is damaged, incomplete, like it's still being put back together. So every time someone finds a piece and brings it here, he can reclaim it, make it more whole. But that doesn't explain why people keep finding new pieces. If he's been taking them back, where are they coming from? Mara was quiet for a moment. Then her eyes widened. Cole? Where exactly did you find your piece? The exact spot? Under a bush, about 10 feet from where I'd set up my tent. And I found mine in almost the same relative position to my camp. And Dorothy said she found hers near her campsite too. So think about it. James died on the west side of the pass. The bell broke apart when he hit the rocks. But we're finding pieces scattered all over the area, and they always appear near where people camp, like they're being placed there. I felt a chill run down my spine. You're saying he's putting them near our camps? On purpose? Maybe he wants them found. Maybe he wants them returned. Because every piece that gets returned makes his bell more complete, makes his search more real. But why October? Why does this only happen in October? Because that's when he died. October 22nd, 1952. Maybe that's the only time he can manifest. The only time the barrier between whatever he is and our world is thin enough. We sat with that theory as the night slowly gave way to dawn. The temperature dropped even further, and I could see ice forming on the water in our bottles. My breath came out in clouds of white vapor. As the first gray light began to illuminate the pass, Mara suddenly grabbed my arm. Cole, look! She was pointing toward the cliff face where James had died. In the dim, pre-dawn light, I could see something that hadn't been visible before. There was a trail, or what looked like a trail, worn into the granite. It led from the cliff face, along the eastern edge of the pass, and disappeared into a section of broken rocks and small trees. I've patrolled this area a dozen times, I said. I've never seen that path before. Neither have I, but I'm willing to bet that's the route he walks. Every night, every October, following the same pattern he followed that last day, searching the areas where he thought Catherine might be. Mara stood up. I want to follow it. What? Mara, we should leave. We got what we came for. We have evidence. We have answers. Do we? We have footage of something we saw, but we don't know the whole story. That path might lead somewhere, might show us something we need to see. I didn't want to. Every instinct told me to pack up and get out of there as fast as possible. But Mara was already shouldering her pack, checking her flashlight even though we had daylight now. Fine, I said, but we stick together, and if anything feels wrong, we leave immediately. We broke camp quickly, stuffing our gear into our packs without our usual careful organization. The path Mara had spotted was faint, barely visible even in the growing light, but it was definitely there. Marks on the granite where boots had worn the surface down over years. Decades, maybe longer. We followed it east, away from the main trail. The path wound through broken rocks and scattered white bark pines, staying mostly level along the cliff face, After about 15 minutes, we came to a section where the granite dropped away sharply, forming a steep slope down into the valley below. "This is where he fell," Mara said. "This is where James Pritchard died." I looked over the edge. It was a long drop, at least 200 feet, ending in a jumble of broken rocks at the bottom. I tried to imagine what his last moments had been like, slipping on the ice, falling, knowing he was going to die without finding his wife. "Look at this," Mara said. She was crouched down, examining something on the ground. I walked over and saw what she'd found. Flowers. Fresh wildflowers, laid carefully on a flat rock near the edge of the cliff. They were the kind that grow at high elevation, purple and yellow, the stems still green. "Who would leave flowers up here?" I asked. "And when? We're the only people who've been up here in days." Mara picked up one of the flowers carefully. "These weren't here yesterday when we hiked up. I would have noticed them. Someone, or something, left these here during the night." "James? You think James left flowers?" "Maybe. Or maybe Catherine did." I stared at her. "Catherine's dead. She's been dead for 65 years. James is dead too, Cole. That hasn't stopped him from walking this pass every October." She had a point. We stood there for a moment looking at the flowers, trying to understand what they meant. Then Mara stood up and continued along the path. "Where are you going?" I called after her. "The path keeps going. I want to see where it leads." I followed, keeping close. The path curved away from the cliff edge and headed deeper into a section of the pass I'd never explored before. The terrain became rougher, more broken, and I had to watch my footing carefully. After another 10 minutes, we came to a narrow crevasse, maybe 6 feet wide, cutting across our path. The path continued on the other side, but there was no obvious way across. The gap was too wide to jump, and the sides were too steep to climb down and back up. "Dead end," I said. "We should turn back." But Mara was looking down into the crevasse, shining her flashlight into the darkness. "Cole, there's something down there." I came to the edge and looked. About 15 feet down, wedged between the walls of the crevasse, there was something that looked like fabric. Old, faded fabric, partially covered by dirt and debris. "Is that clothing?" Mara asked. My blood went cold. "I think so." "Could it be from Catherine?" "The search report said she fell into a crevasse. What if this is where she died?" "The report said she was found the following spring. They recovered her body." "Are you sure? Or did they find a body they assumed was hers?" I thought back to the Historical Society files. The newspaper clipping had said Catherine's body was found in a crevasse about half a mile from where James died, but I couldn't remember if it had specified exactly where. "We need to report this," I said. "If there's a body down there, if there's any chance it's related to the Pritchard case, we need to let the authorities know." Mara was already pulling out her radio. "Stanley Base, this is Keegan. Do you copy?" Static. She tried again. Nothing. "We're too deep in the pass," I said. "The rocks are blocking the signal." "Then we hike back until we get signal and call it in." We marked the location carefully, using GPS coordinates and physical landmarks, then started the hike back toward the main trail. As we walked, I kept thinking about those flowers on the cliff edge, about the fabric in the crevasse, about the path that led between them. James walked this route every night. From where he died, past where Catherine died. Searching for her even though she was right there, had been there all along, unless she hadn't been. When we finally got back to an area with radio reception, Mara made the call. Within 2 hours, we had a team coming up, including a technical rescue crew equipped for crevasse recovery. Jack Morrison, my supervisor, was with them. "You two want to explain what you were doing out here?" he asked when they reached our position. His tone made it clear he wasn't happy. "Routine patrol," I said. "We spotted what looked like an old trail and decided to follow it. Found what might be human remains in a crevasse. Might be related to an old missing person case," Mara added. "Catherine Pritchard, from 1952. Jack's expression softened slightly. "Pritchard, I've heard that name. Her body was recovered, though, wasn't it?" "According to the records, yes. But we think this site should be investigated anyway." The technical team took over, setting up ropes and pulleys to safely access the crevasse. It took them nearly 2 hours to reach the fabric and carefully bring it up. When they laid it out on the granite, we could all see what it was. A woman's jacket, old style, from the 1950s, made of wool that had mostly rotted away, and in the pocket, protected by the fabric, was a small leather wallet. One of the team members opened it carefully. Inside was an ID card, the information barely legible after so many years. But we could make out the name, Catherine Pritchard. Jack looked at me, then at Mara. "This doesn't make sense. If this is Catherine's jacket, why wasn't it found when they recovered her body in 1953? "Maybe they didn't recover Catherine," Mara said quietly. "Maybe they recovered someone else, another missing person from around that time, and everyone just assumed it was her. That's a hell of an assumption, but possible. How much of a body would be left after months in the snow? How thorough would identification methods have been in 1953? Jack didn't have an answer for that. He called it into headquarters, and within a few hours, we had detectives and forensic specialists hiking up to the pass. The decision was made to do a full excavation of the crevasse to see if there were any human remains still down there. Mara and I were told we could leave, that we weren't needed for the recovery operation. But I found myself not wanting to go. I needed to know if Catherine Pritchard's body was really down there. If she'd been in that crevasse all along while her husband searched for her just feet away. We stayed and watched as the team carefully excavated the crevasse. It took most of the day, but eventually they found what they were looking for. Bones. Human bones, along with scraps of clothing and personal items. A woman's wedding ring. A broken wristwatch stopped at 4:23 p.m. The forensic specialist confirmed it on site. Based on the clothing, the personal effects, and the location, I'd say there's a high probability this is Catherine Pritchard. We'll need DNA testing to be certain, but everything fits. "If this is Catherine," one of the detectives said, "then who did they recover in 1953? That question would take months to answer. Eventually, through dental records and historical research, they determined that the body recovered in 1953 had been another missing woman, Alice Summers, who'd disappeared from a nearby town around the same time as Catherine. In the chaos of the search and the condition of the remains, identifications had been mixed up. Catherine Pritchard had never been found. She'd been in that crevasse for 65 years, just yards away from the path her husband walked every October, ringing his bell, calling her name. When dawn finally came that morning after our long vigil, Mara and I packed up our gear and started the hike down. We were exhausted, physically and emotionally drained, but there was one more thing I needed to do. At the cliff edge, where James had died, where we'd seen the fresh flowers, I stopped. I pulled out my radio and switched it off, then spoke into the cold morning air. "James Pritchard, if you can hear me, we found her. We found Catherine. She's been here all along, waiting for you. You can stop searching now. You can rest." Mara stood beside me, and after a moment she spoke too. "You never gave up on her. You loved her enough to keep searching even after death. That's more than most people ever have. She's been found now. You can both be at peace." We stood there for several minutes, listening to the wind move through the pass, wondering if somehow James Pritchard's spirit could hear us, could understand that his search was finally over. Then we turned and started the long hike down. The recovery of Catherine Pritchard's remains made local news for a few days. The story of a decades-old mix-up, of a woman finally being identified and properly buried next to her husband. The romantic angle of it, the dedicated husband who died searching for her, caught people's attention. But Mara and I knew there was more to the story. We knew that James Pritchard hadn't stopped searching after death, that every October he walked Granite Pass, ringing his bell, hoping Catherine would hear it and come back to him. Now that she'd been found, now that she'd been properly laid to rest, would he finally be able to stop? I went back to Granite Pass in October of 2018, exactly 1 year after my first experience there. I did an overnight patrol, set up camp in the same spot, and waited as darkness fell. I didn't hear the bell, not once. The night was quiet, just the wind and the small sounds of the wilderness settling in for the night. I slept peacefully for the first time in months. When I came down the next morning, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. Whatever had been happening at Granite Pass, whatever echo of James Pritchard had been walking that lonely route year after year, it was over now. He'd found his wife, or she'd found him, and they were together at last. Catherine and James Pritchard are buried side by side in the Stanley Cemetery. I visit sometimes, leave flowers on their graves. The headstones are simple, just their names and dates. But I added something to the inscription on James's stone, with permission from the distant relatives who still lived in the area. It reads, "He never stopped searching. Now they rest together." I transferred to a desk job in Boise 6 months after Catherine's remains were recovered. I told people it was for better pay, for a chance to be closer to amenities. But the truth is, I'd seen something at Granite Pass that changed me. I'd witnessed love that transcended death, dedication that survived in the space between this world and whatever comes next. I couldn't go back to the backcountry pretending that it was just trees and rocks and trails. I knew better now. I knew that some places hold memories so strong they become part of the landscape itself. Mara quit the ranger service entirely. Last I heard, she was working as a teacher in Missoula. We still talk sometimes, usually late at night when neither of us can sleep. We talk about James and Catherine Pritchard, about the bell we heard, about the figure we saw walking through the darkness. And we talk about that last night at Granite Pass, after Catherine's remains were recovered, when the bell finally fell silent. Every October, I think about Granite Pass, about a man who loved his wife so much that not even death could make him stop searching for her, about a love story that took 65 years to find its ending. The official records say that Catherine and James Pritchard died in October of 1952. They say Catherine's body was misidentified and wasn't properly recovered until 2017. They say James fell to his death while searching for her. But I know there's more to the story. I know that James Pritchard never really died, not completely. Part of him stayed at Granite Pass, walking the same path every October, ringing his bell, calling out for the woman he loved. And now, finally, he can rest. If you ever find yourself at Granite Pass, look for 2 things. First, the path along the eastern cliff face, worn smooth by decades of footsteps that shouldn't exist. And second, on October 22nd, if you're there at exactly 4:23 p.m., the moment when Catherine's watch stopped, the moment she died, stand quietly and listen. You won't hear a bell, not anymore. But sometimes people say you can hear something else. The sound of 2 people walking together, their footsteps in sync, moving away from the pass and toward whatever lies beyond. James and Catherine Pritchard, finally together again, finally at peace. Let them be. Their story is over now, and it ended the way all great love stories should, together. My name is Riley Dax, and I spent 9 years working as a search and rescue coordinator for the Idaho Forest Service in the Sawtooth Wilderness. During that time, I participated in over 200 search operations. Most of them ended well, with lost hikers found safe, maybe a little dehydrated or embarrassed, but alive. Some ended badly, with recoveries instead of rescues. And then there was one that didn't end at all, not really. It just stopped, leaving more questions than answers. I found your channel through a friend who knows I don't sleep well anymore. She thought hearing other people's stories might help me feel less alone with mine. I'm not sure if it does, but I figure if I tell this story, maybe someone out there will have an explanation that makes sense. Because after 3 years, I still don't have one. This happened in early November of 2019. The busy season was long over, and most sensible people had finished their hiking for the year. The Sawtooths in November are beautiful but unforgiving. Temperatures drop below zero at night. Early snows can trap you above tree line, and if something goes wrong, help is hours away at best. On November 4th, we got a call from a woman named Patricia Voss. Her son Marcus and his girlfriend Emily Ferraro had gone on a 3-day backpacking trip into Red Canyon, one of the more remote areas of the wilderness. They were supposed to check in when they got back to cell service on November 3rd. They never did. Patricia had already called the local hospitals and the sheriff's department before reaching out to us. No accidents reported, no one matching their descriptions. They'd simply vanished somewhere between the trailhead and civilization. I was assigned as the search coordinator, which meant organizing teams, managing resources, and making the hard calls about where to search and when to call it off. My partner for this operation was Grant Holder, a veteran ranger who'd been working search and rescue in the Sawtooths longer than I'd been alive. If anyone knew the wilderness, it was Grant. We started by pulling the permit Marcus and Emily had filed. They'd planned to hike into Red Canyon, set up a base camp near the canyon floor, and do day hikes from there. The permit listed them as experienced hikers with appropriate gear for November conditions. Their planned route was straightforward, nothing technical, nothing that should have caused problems for people who knew what they were doing. Red Canyon, this time of year, Grant said, studying the map. Could be snow up there, could be ice. If they went off trail, could be a lot of things. When's the last confirmed sighting? Trailhead register shows them signing in on November 1st at 7:42 a.m. After that, nothing. 3 days. They could be anywhere by now, or they could be nowhere at all. We assembled a team by noon, 6 rangers, 4 search and rescue volunteers, and 2 local volunteers who knew the area well. We also had a helicopter on standby in case we needed aerial support, weather permitting. The hike into Red Canyon is about 7 miles, following a creek that cuts through granite walls that rise 500 feet on either side. It's spectacular scenery, but it's also the kind of place where if you fall, no one's finding you quickly. The trail is well maintained until you get about 5 miles in. Then it becomes more of a suggestion than an actual path. We reached the area where Marcus and Emily had planned to camp around 4 p.m. The light was already fading, temperature dropping fast. We found their campsite easily enough. They'd set up in a flat area near the creek, sheltered by a cluster of lodgepole pines. But the tent was gone. No sleeping bags, no stove, no food. Just some flattened grass where the tent had been, and a ring of rocks that might have been a fire pit. They broke camp, one of the volunteers said. Packed up and moved on. Or something made them leave in a hurry, Grant added. He was crouched near the fire pit, running his hand through cold ashes. Fire was here, though, probably 2 nights ago based on how settled this ash is. We split into teams and started a grid search of the surrounding area, calling out their names every few minutes. As darkness fell, we set up our own camp near where theirs had been and planned our search strategy for the next day. If they were smart, Grant said as we huddled around a camp stove, heating water for dinner. They headed back toward the trailhead, got spooked by something, decided to bail on the trip early. Then why didn't they make it out? Could have gotten turned around. Easy to do in this canyon, especially if visibility was bad. Could have injured themselves, could have run into a bear. Any bear activity reported in this area? Not recently, but that doesn't mean much. Bears go where the food is. We tried to sleep that night, but I kept waking up, listening to the sounds of the canyon, the creek running over rocks, the wind moving through the trees, and something else, something I couldn't quite identify. A smell, faint but distinct. Wood smoke maybe, or something similar. I got up around 3 a.m. and walked to the edge of our camp. Grant was already up, standing near the fire pit, shining his flashlight into the darkness. "You smell that?" he asked when I approached. "Yeah," thought I was imagining it. Wood smoke. Fresh. Like someone has a fire going nearby. Could be another camping party. This time of year, out here, doubt it. We radioed the other teams that were camped at different points around the canyon. None of them reported seeing or smelling anything unusual. We documented the smell in our logs and went back to trying to sleep. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The next morning, we expanded the search. Teams spread out in different directions, covering the canyon floor, the slopes, the areas near the creek. We had the helicopter up too, running a thermal scan of the area. By noon, we still hadn't found anything. No tracks, no gear, no sign of Marcus and Emily. Then, around 1 p.m., one of the teams radioed in. "We've got something. Canyon floor, about 2 miles northeast of base camp. You need to see this." Grant and I hiked to their position as fast as we could. When we got there, I saw what they'd found, and my stomach dropped. 2 backpacks sitting side by side on the granite floor of the canyon. Just sitting there, positioned neatly next to each other, like someone had carefully placed them there and walked away. "Don't touch anything," I said, though everyone already knew protocol. "Grant, call it in. Get photos from every angle." While Grant radioed our find to headquarters, I circled the packs slowly, examining everything I could see without touching them. They were modern hiking packs, good quality, the kind experienced backpackers would use. And they were completely dry. No mud, no water damage, no signs of having been exposed to the elements. They looked like someone had just set them down minutes ago. But here's what really bothered me. There was no campsite nearby. No tent, no sleeping bags, no sign that Marcus and Emily had stopped here to rest. Just these 2 packs, placed deliberately on bare granite. "Riley, look at this," one of the volunteers said. She was pointing at the ground around the packs. I crouched down and saw what she meant. The area around the packs was completely undisturbed. No footprints in the thin layer of dirt and pine needles that covered the granite. No scuff marks, no drag marks, nothing to indicate how the packs had gotten there. "That's not possible," Grant said, coming over to look. "Someone had to carry these here. There should be tracks." "Unless they were placed here before the last wind," I suggested. "Could have blown away any tracks." "Maybe. But look at the packs themselves. No dust on them, no debris. If they'd been sitting here for days, there'd be something." He was right. The packs looked pristine, like they'd just been set down. We photographed everything, then carefully opened the first pack. Inside, we found what you'd expect: clothing, a water filter, food supplies, a first aid kit. Everything was neatly packed, nothing disturbed. There was a wallet in one of the side pockets, and the ID confirmed it belonged to Marcus Voss. The second pack was Emily's, and it was the same story. All her gear carefully packed, nothing missing, nothing out of place. But then one of the team members reached into a small front pocket and pulled out a phone. "Got Emily's phone here," she said, holding it up. The screen was dark. "Try turning it on," I said. She pressed the power button and the screen lit up. The phone was locked, but we could see the battery indicator, 87%. And there was a notification on the lock screen, an alarm set for 2:47 a.m. Before anyone could say anything, the phone started ringing. Not a call, an alarm. The same alarm that was set for 2:47 a.m. was going off now, at 1:23 p.m. We all froze. The alarm kept ringing, a simple beeping sound that seemed too loud in the quiet canyon. After about 30 seconds, it stopped on its own. "Check the time settings," Grant said quietly. The team member swiped through the lock screen, which for some reason wasn't actually locked, and opened the settings. The phone's clock was correct, showing 1:23 p.m. The alarm was set for 2:47 a.m. There was no reason it should have gone off in the middle of the day. "Software glitch?" someone suggested. "Maybe," I said, but I didn't believe it. I pulled out my own phone and took photos of Emily's phone screen, documenting the time, the battery level, the alarm notification. "We need to keep searching," Grant said. "The packs are here, but Marcus and Emily aren't. They could be injured, could be lost. Let's expand the grid." We left one team member with the packs as evidence and continued the search. The smell of wood smoke was back, stronger now, even though we couldn't see any smoke or fire. It seemed to be coming from deeper in the canyon, from an area where the granite walls narrowed, and the creek disappeared into a series of small waterfalls. We followed the smell, moving carefully over the rough terrain. The canyon here was a maze of broken rocks and fallen trees, hard to navigate even in daylight. As we got deeper, the smell of wood smoke got stronger, but we still didn't see any fire. Then Grant stopped suddenly. "Listen." We all froze, straining to hear whatever he'd heard. At first, there was nothing but the sound of water and wind. Then I heard it too. Voices. Faint, distant, but definitely human voices. "Marcus? Emily?" I called out. "This is Idaho Search and Rescue. If you can hear us, call out." The voices continued, but they didn't respond to my calls. They just kept talking, too far away to make out words, but close enough to know they were there. We moved toward the sound, but the terrain was getting dangerous. The granite here was steep and slick with ice, and one wrong step could send you sliding into the creek below. I was about to suggest we rope up when the voices suddenly stopped. Complete silence. Even the wind seemed to die down. "Where did they go?" one of the volunteers asked. Nobody had an answer. We searched the area for another hour, but found nothing, no people, no campsite, no explanation for the voices we'd heard. Eventually, we had to turn back as darkness approached. That night, back at base camp, we reviewed everything we'd found. 2 backpacks, placed neatly on bare granite with no tracks around them. A phone with 87% battery that set off an alarm at the wrong time. The smell of fresh wood smoke with no visible fire. Voices in the canyon that disappeared when we got close. "I don't like this," Grant said. He'd been unusually quiet all evening. "Something's not right here." "You think they're in trouble? Something happened to them?" "I think we're missing something obvious. Something we're not seeing." "Like what?" He shook his head. "I don't know. But tomorrow, I want to search that area where we heard the voices. Really search it, every inch." The next morning brought new problems. The weather had turned overnight, and a storm system was moving in. We had maybe 6 hours before conditions would force us to evacuate. The helicopter couldn't fly in the incoming weather, so we were on foot only. We split into 3 teams. One stayed with the backpacks, still sitting exactly where we'd found them. One searched the area around the original campsite, and Grant and I led a team back to where we'd heard the voices the day before. The smell of wood smoke was even stronger now, hanging in the cold air like fog. But we still couldn't see any fire, couldn't find any source for the smell. We spread out and started a systematic search, checking every crevice, every overhang, every place where someone might have taken shelter. That's when I found the first piece of clothing. It was a jacket, expensive hiking gear, draped over a rock about 50 yards from where we'd heard the voices. The jacket was dry and clean, no damage, no blood, just sitting there like someone had taken it off and carefully laid it down. "Grant, over here." He came over and examined the jacket. There was a name tag sewn into the collar. Marcus Voss. "Why would he take off his jacket?" I asked. Isansus asked. "It's freezing out here." "Paradoxical undressing," Grant said. "When people get hypothermic, sometimes they feel hot and start removing clothes. But this jacket doesn't look like it was torn off in confusion. It looks like it was placed here deliberately." We kept searching and found more items. Emily's gloves, placed neatly on top of a flat rock. One of Marcus's hiking boots sitting upright on the ground as if he'd just stepped out of it. Each item was positioned carefully, almost ceremonially, and each was completely clean and undamaged. "This is staged," I said. "Someone's placing these items, but why?" "To lead us somewhere," Grant said quietly. "Or to lead us away from somewhere." We followed the trail of items deeper into the canyon. A water bottle here, a hat there, each one placed just far enough apart that we had to search to find the next one. The items led us toward the narrowest part of the canyon, where the walls closed in and the creek had carved a deep channel through the granite. And that's where we found them. Marcus and Emily were sitting at the base of the canyon wall, their backs against the granite, side by side. For a moment, I thought they were resting, maybe sleeping. Then I got closer and realized they weren't moving at all, weren't breathing. "Get medical up here now," I shouted into my radio even though I already knew it was too late. Grant and I approached carefully. Marcus and Emily were both dressed in base layers, no jackets, no boots. Their exposed skin was pale from cold, but there were no obvious injuries. No blood, no broken bones, no signs of trauma. They looked peaceful, almost serene, like they'd just sat down to rest and never woken up. But here's what made my skin crawl. They were completely dry. The ground around them was damp from the creek mist, and there were patches of ice on the rocks, but Marcus and Emily's clothing, their hair, their skin, all completely dry, like they hadn't been sitting outside in November weather, like they'd been somewhere else. Grant checked for pulses anyway, standard protocol, but confirmed what we already knew. They were gone, had been for a while based on the body temperature. But not days, hours maybe, 12 at most. "This doesn't make sense," I said. "We've been searching this area. How did we miss them?" "We didn't miss them," Grant said slowly. "They weren't here yesterday. I'd stake my career on it. We searched this exact spot." I wanted to argue with him, but he was right. We'd been thorough. There was no way we would have walked past two people sitting against a canyon wall. The medical team arrived, along with the county coroner. They confirmed time of death was recent, probably within the last 12 to 18 hours. Cause of death appeared to be hypothermia, but they'd need an autopsy to be certain. "Any idea how they ended up here?" the coroner asked me. "No. We found their backpacks 2 miles from here yesterday. Found a trail of their clothing leading to this spot. But we searched this area yesterday and they weren't here. Could they have been moving around, found this spot later? Without their gear? Without their boots? In this temperature?" The coroner didn't have an answer for that. As they prepared to move the bodies, I noticed something else. The ground directly beneath where Marcus and Emily had been sitting was darker than the surrounding granite. Not wet, not stained, just darker, like it had been scorched or exposed to intense heat. "Grant, look at this." He crouched down and ran his hand over the darkened stone. "Warm," he said. "This stone is warm. Everything else out here is near freezing, but this spot is warm." We documented it, photographed it, took temperature readings with a thermal gun from the medical kit. The spot where Marcus and Emily had been sitting was 15 degrees warmer than the surrounding area. There was no explanation for it. The recovery took most of the day. By the time we got both bodies back to the base camp and then out to the trailhead, it was nearly dark. The storm that had been threatening finally arrived, dumping several inches of snow and making the trail treacherous. Back at the ranger station, I wrote up my report, trying to make sense of what we'd found. 2 hikers had disappeared for 3 days. We'd found their backpacks placed neatly on the canyon floor with no tracks around them. We'd found their clothing arranged in a trail leading to their bodies. And we'd found them sitting peacefully against a canyon wall, dead from hypothermia in a spot we'd searched the day before. The official cause of death was hypothermia and exposure. The official explanation was that Marcus and Emily had gotten disoriented, possibly separated from their gear, and had succumbed to the cold. The strange details, the arranged items, the warm stone, all of it was noted in my report but not explained. I thought that would be the end of it. A tragic outcome, but at least there was closure for the families. But then, 2 weeks later, I got a call from Patricia Voss, Marcus's mother. "I need to talk to you about something," she said. Her voice was strained, like she'd been crying. "Something I found in Marcus's apartment when I was cleaning it out." "What did you find?" "A journal. He'd been keeping notes about the trip, planning it out, and there's an entry from the night before they disappeared. November 1st. He wrote something that doesn't make sense." "What did he write?" "He said they'd heard voices in the canyon. Multiple people talking, laughing, like there was a party somewhere nearby. But when they went to investigate, there was no one there. Just the smell of smoke and the sound of voices that stopped as soon as they got close. I felt ice settle in my stomach." "Did he say anything else?" "He said they found something. A campsite. Or what looked like a campsite. But it was wrong somehow. He couldn't explain it in writing, said he'd tell me about it when he got back. That was the last entry in his journal." After I hung up with Patricia, I pulled out my own notes from the search. The smell of wood smoke with no visible fire. The voices we'd heard that disappeared when we approached. The items placed deliberately, almost ceremonially. The warm stone beneath the bodies. I called Grant. "We need to talk about Red Canyon." We met at a coffee shop in Stanley. I told him about the journal entry, about Marcus hearing voices and finding a strange campsite. Grant listened quietly, his expression getting darker as I talked. "I've been thinking about this search nonstop," he said when I finished, "and I've been going through old reports, looking for similar cases. You want to know what I found? Tell me. 3 other disappearances in Red Canyon over the last 20 years. Different times of year, different circumstances, but some of the details are similar. Items found arranged in patterns, victims found in places that had already been searched, and in each case, search teams reported smelling smoke and hearing voices they couldn't locate. Why didn't anyone connect them before? Because they were years apart. Different search teams, different coordinators. Nobody was looking at the pattern. But Riley, there's something else. In 2 of those cases, the victims' phones were found with their alarms set for 2:47 a.m. The coffee I'd been drinking suddenly tasted like ash. The same time as Emily's alarm. Exactly the same. That can't be a coincidence. No, it can't. We sat in silence for a moment. Finally, I asked the question I'd been avoiding. What do you think is happening out there? Grant rubbed his face, looking older than I'd ever seen him. I don't know, but I think whatever it is, it's been happening for a long time. And I think Marcus and Emily stumbled into something they weren't supposed to see. Like what? A drug operation? Someone's illegal camp? If it were that simple, we'd have found evidence. Tracks, gear, something. But there's nothing. Just missing people, strange smells, voices that vanish, and items arranged like someone's leaving us clues or playing games. So what do? Officially, nothing. The case is closed. Marcus and Emily died from exposure, tragic but explainable. But unofficially, I think we go back to Red Canyon. I think we search that area where we found them, really search it, and see what we can find. When? Spring. After the snow melts. When we can access the whole canyon safely. I agreed, but I wasn't sure I wanted to go back. Part of me wanted to leave Red Canyon alone, to accept the official explanation and move on. But another part of me, the part that had heard those voices and smelled that smoke, needed to know what had really happened out there. Winter passed slowly. I kept working search and rescue operations, but none of them felt the same. Every time I went into the backcountry, I found myself listening for voices, smelling for smoke, looking for things that didn't belong. In March, I got another call from Patricia Voss. "I thought you should know," she said. "Emily's parents found something similar in her belongings. A voice memo on her phone recorded on November 2nd, the night before they disappeared." "What did it say?" "She said they were being followed, not by an animal or another person, but by something she couldn't see. She said they kept hearing footsteps behind them on the trail, but whenever they turned around, there was nothing there. And she said the canyon was changing. Landmarks they'd passed earlier weren't where they remembered them being. Like the geography itself was shifting." Did she sound scared? She sounded confused, like she was trying to rationalize something that didn't make sense. The recording cuts off mid-sentence, like she stopped talking suddenly. After that call, I knew I had to go back to Red Canyon. Whatever had happened to Marcus and Emily, whatever we'd missed during the search, I needed to find it. In late April, when the snow had finally melted enough to make the canyon accessible, Grant and I hiked back in. We told the station we were doing a routine patrol, checking the trails after winter. We didn't mention that we were actually investigating something we couldn't explain. The hike to Red Canyon felt different this time. The trees seemed too quiet, the usual bird sounds and small animal activity absent. The smell of pine and granite that usually filled the Sawtooths was overlaid with something else, something I couldn't identify. We reached the area where we'd found Marcus and Emily's bodies. The spot against the canyon wall looked the same, except for one thing. The darkened stone where they'd been sitting, the warm spot, was gone. The granite there was the same color as everything around it, and when Grant checked with the thermal gun, it was the same temperature too. "It's like it never happened," Grant said. We expanded our search, looking for anything unusual. For hours we found nothing, just granite and trees, and the creek running through the canyon. But then, around 3 in the afternoon, we smelled it. Wood smoke, just like during the search. We followed the smell deeper into the canyon to the narrow section where the walls closed in. The smell got stronger, and now we could see smoke, thin wisps of it rising from somewhere ahead. "There," Grant said, pointing. Tucked into a fold in the canyon wall, almost invisible unless you were looking for it, was an opening. Not a cave exactly, more like a deep crevice maybe 3 feet wide. The smoke was coming from inside. We approached carefully. "Hello?" I called out. "Anyone in there?" No response. We stood at the opening, peering in. The crevice went back about 15 feet, then opened into a wider space, and in that space we could see the glow of a fire. "Someone's camping in there," Grant said. "This isn't a designated camping area. We need to check it out." We squeezed through the opening, using our flashlights to illuminate the space. The interior was larger than it looked from outside, maybe 20 feet across, with a ceiling high enough to stand up in. And in the center, there was a fire burning in a ring of stones, but nobody was tending it. The space was empty except for the fire and some scattered items around the edges. Backpacks, sleeping bags, clothing, all arranged neatly against the walls. Too much gear for 1 or 2 people. It looked like supplies for a dozen campers. "This is wrong," I said. "This is all wrong." Grant was examining the gear. "Riley, look at this." He held up a jacket, and I recognized it immediately. It was Marcus's jacket, the one we'd found draped over a rock during the search, the one that had been collected as evidence. That can't be his jacket. His jacket is in evidence storage. Then it's the same model and size. He turned it over, showing me the name tag sewn into the collar. Marcus Voss. I felt the walls closing in. We need to get out of here. We need to call this in. As I turned to leave, something caught my eye. On the far wall of the space, someone had carved words into the stone. Deep cuts, precise letters, like they'd been made with a chisel or knife. I walked over and shined my light on them. 2:47, when the canyon opens. Grant came up beside me. "What does that mean?" Before I could answer, my phone started ringing. Not a call, an alarm. The same alarm sound we'd heard coming from Emily's phone. I pulled it out and looked at the screen. I hadn't set any alarms, but there it was, going off. The time on my phone read 3:52 p.m., but the alarm notification said it was set for 2:47 a.m. "Turn it off," Grant said, his voice tight. I swiped to dismiss the alarm, but it wouldn't stop. It kept ringing, the sound echoing off the stone walls, getting louder and louder until it felt like it was coming from inside my head. Then, suddenly, it stopped. The silence that followed was complete. No fire crackling, no wind outside, no creek running through the canyon, just absolute silence. And then we heard the voices. They came from everywhere and nowhere, dozens of voices all talking at once. Some laughing, some calling out names, some singing. The same voices we'd heard during the search, but closer now, all around us. "We need to leave," Grant said. "Now." We moved toward the opening, but the voices got louder, more insistent. And now we could make out words. "Stay. Stay with us. It's warmer here, it's safer here. Don't leave. The canyon is cold, the canyon is dangerous. We're here. We're all here. Join us." I pushed through the opening, Grant right behind me. The moment we stepped back into the canyon, the voices stopped. The silence of the canyon returned, normal sounds filtering back in. The creek, the wind, a bird calling somewhere above us. We didn't stop to talk. We just ran. Back through the canyon, over the rough terrain, not caring about the danger, just needing to get out. We didn't stop running until we reached the main trail, miles from Red Canyon. We made it back to the trailhead just before dark. Neither of us spoke during the drive back to Stanley. What could we say? That we'd found a hidden space with a fire no one was tending? That we'd heard voices offering to keep us warm and safe? That my phone had set off an alarm I'd never programmed? Back at the ranger station, I went straight to the evidence locker. Marcus's jacket was there, sealed in a plastic bag, right where it should be. I pulled it out and examined it. Same jacket, same name tag, but I'd just seen an identical jacket in that space in the canyon wall. Grant came in while I was staring at it. I checked Emily's phone and evidence. Still locked, still showing 87% battery, still has the alarm set for 2:47 a.m. So, whose phone was that in the canyon? I don't know. But Riley, I think we need to tell someone about this. Officially report what we found. Report what? That we found a fire in an illegal campsite? That we heard voices? They'll think we're losing it. Maybe we are. But if we're not, if something is actually happening in Red Canyon, people need to know. We spent that night writing up an incident report. We documented everything. The hidden space, the fire, the gear that shouldn't have been there, the voices, the carved message on the wall. We submitted it to the district supervisor the next morning. 2 days later, we were called into a meeting. The supervisor, along with 2 other senior rangers, listened to our story without interrupting. When we finished, they exchanged glances. "Did anyone else witness these events?" the supervisor asked. "No, it was just the 2 of us." "And you're certain about what you saw? The jacket with Marcus Voss's name on it?" "Certain." More glances exchanged. Finally, the supervisor sighed. "Look, I believe you saw something. But what you're describing, a hidden campsite with evidence that should be in our locker, voices coming from nowhere, phones setting off alarms that shouldn't go off, it's not something we can act on officially." "So you're not going to investigate?" Grant asked, his voice hard. "We'll send a team to check out the area you described. But between you and me, we've had reports like this before from Red Canyon. Strange sounds, unexplained phenomena, gear found in impossible places. And every time we investigate, we find nothing. Natural formations, acoustic tricks, equipment malfunction." "This wasn't equipment malfunction," I said. "Maybe not. But without corroborating witnesses or physical evidence we can verify, there's nothing to investigate. The official position will be that you encountered an illegal campsite, probably left by squatters or transients. We'll increase patrols in that area." The meeting was over. Our report would be filed, noted, and forgotten. Grant and I walked out of the station knowing that no one was going to take us seriously. "They think we made it up," Grant said when we were outside. "Or that we're seeing things that aren't there. Would you believe us if you heard this story from someone else?" He thought about it. "No, probably not." A week later, the patrol team came back from Red Canyon. They'd found the crevice we described, but there was no fire, no gear, no carved message on the wall. Just an empty space in the rock that animals probably used for shelter. "Maybe we did imagine it," I said to Grant. "Maybe the stress of the search, finding those bodies, maybe it got to us. Both of us? At the same time, imagining the same things? I don't have a better explanation." But Grant did. He'd been doing more research, talking to old-timers who'd worked the Sawtooths for decades. And he'd found a pattern. Every few years, he told me over drinks at his house, someone disappears in Red Canyon. Not every year, not even most years, but regularly enough that if you're looking for it, you can see the pattern. And in every case, search teams report the same things we did. Voices, smoke, gear found in impossible locations. And I think Red Canyon is different somehow. I think there's something about that geography, those granite walls, the way the creek flows through it, that creates conditions we don't understand. Maybe it's geological, maybe it's atmospheric, I don't know, but I think people who go into that canyon at certain times, under certain conditions, they experience something that isn't normal. You're saying the canyon itself is doing something to people. I'm saying the canyon is strange, and I'm saying that we should recommend it be closed to public access. Based on what? We can't even explain what we saw, let alone prove it happened. Then people are going to keep disappearing, and we're going to keep finding them dead in places they shouldn't be, with their gear arranged in patterns that don't make sense. He was right, but I didn't know what to do about it. The official investigation was closed. Marcus and Emily's deaths were attributed to hypothermia. The strange details were noted but unexplained. Case closed. I tried to move on. I went back to work, led other search operations, did my job, but I couldn't get Red Canyon out of my head. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that fire burning in the dark, heard those voices calling out to stay. Then, in June, we got another missing person report. 2 hikers, a married couple, had gone into Red Canyon for a weekend trip. They were supposed to be back on Monday. By Wednesday, they still hadn't checked in. I wasn't assigned to the search. The supervisor made it clear that after my experience in Red Canyon, I should sit this one out. Grant argued, said we knew the area better than anyone, but it didn't matter. We were being benched. The search team went in on Thursday. By Friday, they'd found the couple's backpacks, placed side by side on the canyon floor. No tracks around them, no sign of the hikers. On Saturday, they found a trail of items, carefully arranged, leading deeper into the canyon. And on Sunday, they found the bodies. Sitting against a canyon wall, peaceful and dry, in a spot they'd already searched twice, dead from hypothermia. The stone beneath them was warm. I went to the ranger station that night. The search coordinator, a guy named Thomas, who I'd worked with for years, looked exhausted and confused. "I don't understand what happened," he said. "We were thorough. We searched that area. They weren't there Friday or Saturday. But Sunday morning, there they were, like they'd been sitting there the whole time." "Did you smell anything unusual during the search?" I asked. "Wood smoke. But we never found a fire." "Did you hear voices?" He looked at me sharply. "How did you know that?" "Because Grant and I heard them too, during the Marcus and Emily search, and I think everyone who searches Red Canyon hears them." "What are they?" "I don't know, but I think you need to recommend the canyon be closed. No more permits, no more access. Something's wrong there, and until we figure out what it is, people shouldn't be going in." Thomas didn't argue. He'd seen too much, heard too much. Within a week, Red Canyon was closed to public access pending an environmental and safety review. The official reason given was unstable terrain and increased rockfall danger. The real reason was that people kept dying there in ways we couldn't explain. Grant retired a month later. He'd been planning to retire anyway, but Red Canyon pushed him over the edge. At his retirement party, he pulled me aside. "I'm glad they closed it," he said. "But I don't think it'll matter. Whatever's in that canyon, it's been there a long time. Closing a trail won't change that." So, what do? We warn people, we tell them the stories, and we hope they listen. I stayed with the Forest Service for another year before transferring to a desk job in Boise. I told people it was for better pay, better hours. But the truth is, I couldn't do backcountry work anymore. Couldn't go into remote canyons without thinking about Red Canyon, without listening for voices that shouldn't be there. Red Canyon remains closed. Every few months, someone posts on social media about sneaking in, about exploring the restricted area. Most of them just get citations for trespassing, but some of them don't come back out. And when we find them, it's always the same. Peaceful, dry, sitting against a canyon wall in places we've already searched. Dead from hypothermia. I still have Emily's phone alarm on my mind. 2:47 a.m., when the canyon opens. That's what the message on the wall said. I've spent 3 years trying to figure out what it means. When does a canyon open? What does that even mean? Last month, I got an email from an anthropologist at Boise State University. She'd heard about the Red Canyon closures and wanted to know if she could review the incident reports. I sent her copies of everything, figuring it couldn't hurt. She called me 2 days later. "I found something in historical records," she said. In 1847, a group of trappers went into what we now call Red Canyon. Only 2 of them came back out. They claimed the others had been taken by the canyon itself, said the walls opened up and swallowed them. Their story was dismissed as delirium or guilt over abandoning their companions. But according to their account, the disappearances happened at 2:47 in the morning. They were specific about the time because one of them had a pocket watch. He said the canyon changed at exactly 2:47, that the walls seemed to ripple and shift, and when they settled back, 3 of their party were gone. The walls opened, I said quietly, at 2:47. That's what they claimed, and here's the thing. I checked astronomical records for that night in October 1847. At exactly 2:47 a.m. local time, there was a total lunar eclipse visible from this area. The only total lunar eclipse that year. My skin prickled. Are you saying the canyon is affected by lunar eclipses? I'm saying there might be a correlation. I checked the dates for all the disappearances in Red Canyon that you documented. Marcus and Emily disappeared on November 3, 2019. There was a partial lunar eclipse at 2:47 a.m. local time that night. The couple you found in June? Lunar eclipse at 2:47 a.m., and so on, going back through the records. So the canyon does something during lunar eclipses. Or something in the canyon becomes active during lunar eclipses. I can't explain the mechanism, but the correlation is undeniable. After I hung up with her, I pulled up astronomical calendars. The next lunar eclipse visible from Idaho would be in October. At 2:47 a.m., I called Grant and told him what I'd learned. He was quiet for a long time. So what do we do? He finally asked. I don't know. Red Canyon is closed. We've warned people. But you said it yourself. Closing a trail won't change what's there. Maybe we should be there, Grant said. During the next eclipse, see what actually happens. That's a terrible idea. Probably. But we've spent 3 years wondering. Don't you want to know? I did want to know, but I was also terrified of what we might find. What if we went into Red Canyon during an eclipse and ended up like Marcus and Emily, like all the others? Sitting peacefully against a canyon wall, dry and still, in a place that hadn't existed when we'd searched it before. Let me think about it, I told Grant. I spent the next 2 weeks going back through every piece of evidence we had. I reread all the incident reports, studied the photographs, reviewed the timelines, and I kept coming back to the same questions. Why 2:47? What opened? And, most importantly, where did the victims go between when they disappeared and when we found them? Because that was the real mystery. Marcus and Emily had vanished on November 3rd. We'd found their campsite on November 5th, their packs on November 6th, and their bodies on November 7th. But the coroner said they'd only been dead 12 to 18 hours. So where had they been for the first 3 days? I called Patricia Voss again. I have a question about Marcus's journal. Did he mention anything about losing time? About hours passing that he couldn't account for? Actually, yes, she said. On November 2nd, he wrote that they'd hiked for what felt like 2 hours. But when they checked their watches, 6 hours had passed. He thought their watches were malfunctioning, but both his and Emily's showed the same time. Did he say anything else about time? He said the sun seemed wrong, that it was setting when it should have been midday, but then he crossed that out, said he must have been confused about what time they'd started hiking. Time distortion. That was new, or rather it was newly documented. I wondered if other victims had experienced the same thing but hadn't lived to tell anyone about it. I reached out to the families of the couple who'd disappeared in June, asking if they'd kept any journals or sent any messages about their trip. The wife's sister had a text message from the morning they'd disappeared. Something weird is happening with our phones, both showing different times even though we set them together this morning. And my fitness tracker says we've walked 15 miles, but we've only been hiking for 2 hours. Signal is terrible, so this might not send. We'll call when we get back. she never called back. I compiled all of this into a document and sent it to the anthropologist at Boise State. She called me the next day, and her voice was excited in a way that made me uneasy. "Riley, I think I know what's happening. Or at least I have a theory. Have you ever heard of temporal anomalies? Like time travel?" "Not exactly. More like places where time behaves differently than it should. There are documented cases, mostly anecdotal, of areas where time seems to move faster or slower. Usually it's attributed to psychological factors, but what if some of these places are real? You think Red Canyon is one of these places? I think during lunar eclipses, something about the gravitational forces and the canyon's geology creates a localized temporal distortion. People who enter the canyon during an eclipse experience time differently. What feels like hours to them might be days to us, or vice versa. That sounds like science fiction. So does most of quantum physics until you understand it. Look, I'm not saying I can explain the mechanism, but the evidence fits. The time discrepancies, the victims appearing in places already searched, the way their bodies seem to be in different states of decay than they should be. If time moves differently for them, all of it makes sense. Okay, but what about the voices, the fire, the arranged gear? I don't know. Maybe those are symptoms of the temporal distortion. Or maybe there's something else going on that we don't understand yet. But Riley, if I'm right about the time component, that means the victims might not have died from hypothermia at all. What do you mean? I mean, what if they're not dead when we find them? What if they're just in a different temporal state? Alive in their time but appearing dead in ours? I felt my stomach drop. Are you saying we could have saved them? No, I don't think so. I think by the time we find them, whatever happened to them is already locked in. But it means we need to understand what's happening in that canyon. Because if we can figure out the mechanism, maybe we can prevent it. After that conversation, I made my decision. I was going back to Red Canyon during the eclipse. Not officially, not with a team. Just me and Grant, with cameras and recording equipment, to document what happened at 2:47 a.m. when the canyon opened. I called Grant and told him the plan. "We go in on October 17th, I said. Set up camp near where we found the hidden space. Document everything. And at 2:47 a.m. on October 18th, we watch what happens. And if what happens is that we disappear like all the others, then we'll have documented it. Someone will find the cameras, find the recordings, and maybe they'll understand better than we do." "That's a hell of a gamble, Riley. You got a better idea?" He didn't. We spent the next month preparing. We bought new cameras with long battery life, audio recorders, GPS trackers that would continuously transmit our location to a server. We set up a dead man switch, a message that would automatically send to the Forest Service if we didn't check in every 6 hours. We told people we were going on a camping trip to Montana. We didn't tell anyone we were planning to violate the Red Canyon closure. If things went wrong, we didn't want the official investigation to be complicated by the fact that we'd deliberately put ourselves in danger. On October 17th, we hiked into Red Canyon. It was a clear day, cold, but not unreasonably so. The trail was overgrown from lack of use, but still passable. As we got deeper into the canyon, I felt the familiar sense of unease settling over me. The same too quiet feeling, the same sense of being watched. We set up camp about a quarter mile from the hidden space, in a spot with clear sightlines in all directions. We positioned cameras covering every approach, set up audio recorders, and made sure all our equipment was fully charged and functioning. "Now we wait," Grant said. The sun set around 6 p.m. We ate a cold dinner, not wanting to start a fire that might attract attention if any rangers were patrolling nearby. As darkness fell, we began our documentation routine. Every 30 minutes, we'd record a video log, noting the time, temperature, and any observations. At 9 p.m., I smelled it. Wood smoke. "Grant, you smell that?" He nodded. "Right on schedule." We both checked our cameras, making sure they were recording. The smell grew stronger over the next hour, but we couldn't see any smoke or fire, just that distinctive scent hanging in the cold air. At 10:30, we heard the first voices, faint, distant, seeming to come from the direction of the hidden space. We recorded everything, the cameras picking up audio that our ears could barely make out. "Should we investigate?" Grant asked. "Not yet. Let's wait and see what happens at 2:47. The hours crawled by. The voices came and went, sometimes loud enough that we could almost make out words, sometimes fading to nothing. The smell of smoke remained constant, and the temperature, despite the clear night sky, wasn't dropping the way it should. It stayed around 35 degrees, when it should have been in the teens by midnight. At 2 a.m., I checked all our equipment one last time. Everything was recording. Our GPS trackers showed our exact location. Our dead man's switch was armed and ready. If we didn't check in by 8 a.m., help would come. At 2:15, the moon began its eclipse. We could see it clearly from our position in the canyon, the shadow creeping across the lunar surface. At 2:30, things started to change. The voices stopped. The smell of smoke vanished, and the air itself seemed to thicken, like we were breathing through water. Our flashlights, which had been working fine, began to flicker and dim. "Riley, look at your watch," Grant said. His voice strained. I looked down. My watch, which had read 2:31, now read 2:34. I watched as the second hand moved, but it wasn't moving smoothly. It would jump forward several seconds, then back one, then forward again. Time was stuttering. "The cameras," I said. "Check the cameras." Grant pulled out his phone to check the camera feeds. The screen was glitching, showing multiple timestamps at once, images overlapping and fragmenting. At 2:45, the canyon changed. I can't describe it better than that. The walls didn't move, the ground didn't shift, but suddenly everything looked different. Deeper, somehow. Like the canyon had gained an extra dimension that human eyes weren't meant to perceive. And then we saw them, people, dozens of people, walking through the canyon, but they weren't quite solid. They were translucent, ghost-like, moving in strange patterns that didn't follow normal physics. Some were walking on walls, some were upside down, some were moving backwards. "Are those the victims?" Grant whispered. I recognized some of them. Marcus and Emily, walking hand in hand, looking confused but not frightened. The couple from June, sitting on a rock that didn't exist in our version of the canyon. And others, people I didn't recognize, stretching back years or decades based on their clothing. They weren't dead. They were just elsewhere, in a different time, a different version of the canyon that overlapped with ours only during the eclipse. At 2:47 exactly, I heard a sound. Not voices this time, but a tone, like a massive bell ringing through the canyon. The translucent figures all stopped moving and turned in the same direction, toward the hidden space. And then we saw it. The canyon wall, the solid granite face that contained the hidden space, became permeable. Not transparent, but porous, like it was made of fog instead of stone. And through it, we could see into another space entirely. It wasn't the small crevice we'd explored before. It was vast, a cavern that extended far beyond where the canyon wall should have ended. And in that cavern, there was a fire. Not a campfire, but a massive blaze, flames reaching 30 feet high, illuminating the impossible space. The translucent figures began walking toward the permeable wall. They passed through it like it wasn't there, disappearing into the cavern beyond. One by one they went through. Marcus and Emily, the June couple, all the others. "We need to document this," I said, raising my camera. But when I looked at the screen, it was showing nothing but static. All our cameras, all our recording equipment was overloaded by whatever was happening. "Our phones," Grant said. "Check your phone." I pulled it out. The screen showed 2:47 a.m., and there was a notification, an alarm I'd never set, going off, the same alarm Emily had on her phone. Grant's phone was the same. Both our phones ringing with alarms we'd never programmed, the sound mixing with that massive bell tone echoing through the canyon. "We need to leave," I said. "Now." But it was too late. I felt it pull at me, a force like gravity but wrong, coming from the direction of the permeable wall. Not physical pressure, but something deeper, something that grabbed at your sense of self and pulled. Grant felt it too. He was leaning forward, his body straining toward the wall even as he tried to step back. "Riley, I can't." I grabbed his arm. "Fight it. We're leaving." We turned away from the wall, from the cavern, from the fire and the translucent figures. Every step was agony, like walking through chest-deep mud. The pull was enormous, and I could feel myself slipping, my sense of time and place fragmenting. But we kept moving, one step, then another, away from the wall, back toward our camp, back toward the normal world. At 2:50, 3 minutes after the canyon had opened, the pull suddenly released. We stumbled forward, catching ourselves before we fell. When we looked back, the wall was solid again. The cavern was gone. The translucent figures had vanished. The canyon was just a canyon again. We didn't stop moving. We grabbed our gear, abandoning the cameras and recorders that had failed to capture anything useful, and we ran. Out of Red Canyon, along the overgrown trail, not stopping until we reached the trailhead just before dawn. In the truck, hands shaking, we checked our phones. They showed 6:47 a.m. 4 hours had passed, but it had felt like minutes. "Did that really happen?" Grant asked. "I don't know. Check the GPS logs." We pulled up the tracking data on our phones. According to the GPS, we'd stayed at our campsite the entire night. There were no gaps, no jumps, no indication that anything unusual had occurred. But we both knew we'd walked to the trailhead. We'd covered 7 miles in what had felt like 30 minutes. Time in Red Canyon didn't work the way it should, and during the eclipse, it didn't work at all. We drove back to Stanley in silence. When we got to Grant's house, we sat in the truck for a long time before either of us spoke. "We can't tell anyone about this," Grant finally said. "They'd never believe us. And even if they did, what would they do? How do you prevent people from being pulled into a place that only exists 3 minutes a month during lunar eclipses? We could warn them, tell them exactly what we saw. And sound insane. No, Riley, we keep the canyon closed. We tell people it's dangerous, that there's rockfall and unstable terrain. We let them believe the official story, because the truth is too strange, and there's nothing anyone can do about it anyway." He was right. What could anyone do? The canyon opened at 2:47 a.m. during lunar eclipses. For 3 minutes, it became something else, somewhere else, and anyone who was inside when it happened got pulled into that other place, that other time. Marcus and Emily had been inside when it opened. So had all the others. They'd been pulled through into the cavern, into the fire, into whatever existed on the other side of that permeable wall. And hours or days later, their bodies had appeared back in our version of the canyon, peaceful and dry, in places that shouldn't exist. Were they dead? Or were they just displaced, existing in a different timeline that only intersected with ours briefly during each eclipse? I didn't know. I couldn't know. All I knew was that Red Canyon was dangerous in ways that couldn't be explained or prevented. The canyon opened. People disappeared, and all we could do was warn others to stay away. I never went back to Red Canyon after that night. Neither did Grant. We submitted our final recommendations to the Forest Service: keep the canyon closed indefinitely, increase patrols to prevent trespassing, post warnings about unstable geological conditions. The recommendations were accepted. Red Canyon remains closed to this day. Most people don't question it. They accept the official explanation and move on to other trails, other adventures. But some people don't listen. Some people think rules don't apply to them, and every few years, during a lunar eclipse, someone ignores the closures and the warnings. They hike into Red Canyon. They're there at 2:47 a.m. when the canyon opens, and we find them later, sitting peacefully against a canyon wall, their gear arranged nearby, their phones showing alarms they never set. I've attended too many of those recoveries, seen too many families destroyed by something they can't understand, and each time I want to tell them the truth. Want to explain that their loved ones didn't die from hypothermia or exposure, that they were pulled into another time, another place, and that we found their bodies when those timelines briefly aligned again. But I don't tell them, because how do you explain that? How do you give someone closure when the truth is impossible? So I stick to the official story. Hypothermia. Exposure. Tragic, but explainable. And I carry the real truth alone, along with Grant and a few others who've seen what Red Canyon really is. Part of me thinks I should. That someone needs to witness what happens there. Needs to understand it so we can warn people properly. Maybe even figure out how to stop it. But another part of me remembers those voices calling out from the darkness, offering warmth and safety. Remembers the fire burning with no one to tend it. Remembers Marcus and Emily sitting peacefully in death, their backpacks arranged neatly miles away. I think about the carved message on the wall. 2:47. When the canyon opens. Opens to what? Opens from what? Opens for whom? I don't have answers. Just questions and a growing sense that some places aren't meant to be understood. Some places are meant to be avoided, respected, feared. Red Canyon is one of those places. If you're planning to hike in the Sawtooths, stay away from Red Canyon. The official closure says it's because of rockfall danger, and you should believe that. You should believe that and stay away. But if you're the kind of person who doesn't listen to warnings, who thinks rules don't apply to you, then at least remember this. If you hear voices in the canyon, don't follow them. If you smell smoke with no fire, don't investigate. And if your phone sets an alarm for 2:47 a.m. that you didn't program, turn around and get out as fast as you can. Because the canyon opens at 2:47. And what comes through when it opens isn't meant for us to see. Marcus and Emily learned that. So did all the others over the years. They went into Red Canyon looking for adventure, for solitude, for beauty. They found something else instead. Something that arranges your gear in neat patterns. Something that takes your clothes and places them like breadcrumbs leading to nowhere. Something that leaves you sitting against a canyon wall, peaceful and dry, in a place that shouldn't exist. Red Canyon is closed now. It should stay that way. But I know it won't matter. Every few years, someone will ignore the warnings. They'll climb over the barriers, duck under the tape, hike into the restricted area. And if they go at the wrong time, during an eclipse, at 2:47 in the morning when the canyon opens, well, we'll find them eventually. Sitting peacefully, their gear arranged nearby, their phones showing an alarm they never set. And we'll add them to the list of people who learned too late that some places have their own rules, their own logic, their own hunger. Red Canyon is one of those places. Stay away. But I need to tell you one more thing before I finish this story. Something that happened just last week that changed everything I thought I understood about Red Canyon. I got a letter in the mail. No return address, postmarked from Stanley. Inside was a single handwritten page dated October 18th, 2023, the date of the last eclipse. The handwriting was shaky but legible. Riley, if you're reading this, it means I didn't make it back. I'm writing this at 2:46 a.m., 1 minute before the canyon opens. I came here because I needed to know, needed to understand what happened to my son. I'm standing where you found Marcus and Emily, and I can see it starting. The walls are shimmering. I can hear the bell beginning to ring. There are people here, translucent like you described, and one of them looks like Marcus. He's waving at me. He looks peaceful, happy even. I don't think he wants to be saved. I think he chose to stay. I'm going to step through when the wall opens. I need to see if he's really there, if he's really okay. Don't look for me. I'm doing this by choice. Tell the families of the others that their loved ones aren't suffering. They're somewhere else, somewhere that makes sense to them even if it doesn't to us. Thank you for trying to save them. Patricia Voss. I called the Stanley Sheriff's Department immediately. They sent a team to Red Canyon and found Patricia Voss's car at the trailhead. Inside was her phone, her wallet, and a second note that simply said, "I'm with my son now." They searched the canyon for 3 days but found no trace of her, no body, no gear, no footprints. She'd vanished as completely as Marcus had. The official report listed her as missing, presumed dead due to exposure. But I know different. Patricia Voss walked into that permeable wall at 2:47 a.m. She stepped through into that other place, that cavern with the impossible fire, and she found her son. I don't know if that was brave or foolish or both. I don't know if she's dead or alive or existing in some state between the two. All I know is that she made a choice, and she accepted the consequences. It made me think about all the victims in a different way. What if some of them weren't victims at all? What if some of them saw that opening in the wall and chose to step through, choosing whatever existed on the other side over the world they were leaving behind? Marcus's journal said they'd heard voices, seen people, felt like they were being followed. What if those weren't threats? What if they were invitations? I don't have answers. I probably never will. But Patricia's letter changed something for me. I still believe Red Canyon is dangerous. I still believe people should stay away. But maybe, for some people, that danger is also an opportunity. A chance to step out of this timeline and into another one. I'm not saying it's a good choice. I'm not recommending it. But I'm acknowledging that for Patricia Voss, it was her choice to make. The anthropologist called me after she heard about Patricia's disappearance. "I've been thinking," she said. "What if Red Canyon isn't a trap? What if it's a door? A door that opens briefly during eclipses, offering passage to somewhere else. And the people who go through? Maybe they're not lost. Maybe they're just gone. There's a difference. There is a difference. Lost implies they want to be found. Gone implies they've moved on to somewhere else. I still patrol Red Canyon during eclipses. I still try to stop people from going in, because I believe most people who enter that canyon don't understand what they're walking into. They're not making an informed choice like Patricia did. But if someone tells me they know the risks, that they understand what happens at 2:47 a.m., that they're choosing to be there anyway, I'm not sure I have the right to stop them anymore. Red Canyon opens during lunar eclipses. That's a fact. Where it opens to, what exists on the other side, why it holds on to people who enter it, those are mysteries I may never solve. All I can do is warn people, tell them the truth as I understand it, and let them make their own choices. Stay away from Red Canyon, that's my advice. But if you don't, if you choose to enter during an eclipse, at least know what you're getting into. Know that the canyon will open at 2:47 a.m. Know that you might not come back. And know that if you do go through that permeable wall, you're stepping into something we don't understand, into a place where time and space work differently, where the rules of our reality don't apply. Maybe that's terrifying. Maybe that's exactly what you're looking for. Either way, it's your choice to make. Just make it an informed one.